everybody to Wine Wednesday. We've got a special episode going on today. If you're having any trouble with the audio, let me know right away because you don't want to miss any of this. It's going to be excellent. But first, of course, the wine. Today, I'm just going to chill with my Moscato because it's my favorite. And me and my little seahorse glass are going to sit here and learn with all of you because today's topic is dwarf seahorses, something that I am not so familiar with. So, of course, immediately let me know if we're having any audio issues, but I have some special guests on today. I've got Dan Underwood from Seahorse Source. I've got Lucie, who is a breeder in Florida, and they are here to answer all of my and your questions about keeping these little guys. So first, I'm going to ask my of them so we can get a basic idea of what it takes to raise these guys. And then I'm going to allow anyone who wants to join in and ask their questions. So let's get started, shall we?
Check your mic, Kelly, and make sure that you're going through the right mic. You're a little low.
Okay. It might be because I was trying to be quiet, but let me adjust that. Sorry, folks. Let me very quickly adjust that because I want to make sure you guys get all the good stuff. Okay. Do I sound a little better now? Sound better? No? Yes? No?
I'm not sure if people can hear you on YouTube, Kelly.
Yeah,
Which one?
it's low on YouTube.
Okay. I'll turn me up a little bit, but if I get too loud, you guys just let me know. So I'm certainly trying to make this perfect. And you know what? I think it's because I'm honestly not close enough to my thing. So let me move that up. All right. So here we go. I'll turn me up a little bit, just the heck of it. And Lucie up a little bit, the heck of it.
And turn me down about half of
Okay.
what it is. Yep.
Turn you down a bit. All
There
right, we
you go.
got Dan all the way up. And what I'm really curious is, Sean, can you check and make sure we're heard on Facebook? Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and begin. And so, okay, we're heard on Facebook. Let me turn that down. All right. So, first live stream that's going to be better than the usual. Sorry, everyone. But let's welcome, first off, Dan Underwood. Dan is a breeder in Florida. Dan, tell us a little bit about your experiences with dwarf seahorses.
Well, I've been with them since 2003. Um, my setups are different than most people's setups because my setups are large. I use 65-gallon tubs for them, and typically I'll start off with a half dozen in a tub, and about 3 to 4 months, once I get that, sell them up and start a tub and just repeat the process. The bare bottom, I use live mysids with them, and fed them primarily enriched artemia, and essentially the setup was the same as any of my fry tanks.
Gotcha. I know when I asked your opinions about when I was trying to write my dwarf seahorse article and video, which I will link in the description, you advised me to consider it like a fry tank. So I guess my first question for you is, um, why do you think that? Actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm already screwing it up here. I apologize, guys. Okay, so let me just ask you some basic questions about your breeding experience, keeping in mind to anybody watching that there is a difference between a breeding and a hobbyist setup. And so we're just going to ask Dan some questions about the basic idea of how quickly they do things and what they might need. And then in the end, we'll cover what a hobbyist would look at. But for Dan, how often did they breed for you? What was the cycle?
Well, it would depend. We did essentially a group group type setup. So it wasn't like we had individual pairs. We had them in there as a big group, and I didn't pay attention to exactly which one was doing what, but they can breed every couple of weeks. And we would see fry on a constant basis, because we had so many in there. They would, every other day you'd see new fry, and it was a constant progression. And the nice thing about the dwarf seahorses is that you can keep the adults with the fry, so it doesn't require a special setup. The setup itself is almost like a fry setup, but as far as compared to the larger seahorses, there's no separation. You keep them all together. They all eat the same foods, same requirements.
So one of the benefits to dwarf seahorses is that if you do want to breed them, then you have to remove the fry. Exactly, I saw that. And,
Yep.
Go ahead.
Pretty much, if males and females together, you're going to have fry as long as their diet is correct. Now, typically, what happens in captivity is that, at least the way it used to be, people get dwarfs and they'd say after a couple months they'd stop breeding. Well, people finally caught on about using enrichments and correct the nutritional profile with the artemia, and then people found they could continuously breed the dwarfs.
Gotcha. Jumping ahead of me as usual, but no, I'm just kidding. But so if you were to say what the key to success with dwarf seahorses, what the key is, then you would say providing them correct nutrition, and what else?
Well, correct nutrition would be one of the elements, but the other part what makes dwarf seahorses so difficult is that most people keep them in such a tiny tank, and a tiny tank is very difficult to filter properly. And because of the nature of how the tank is, where if you have really good filtration, well, now you're cleaning out the food. And if you don't have really good filtration, if you have plenty of food, that means the water's not filtering real well. So it's a little bit of a conundrum in terms of how it's set up. And that's why we chose to set it up like our production systems, because we could, filter the water better. Most people do a sponge filter or some type of real small hang on the back filter, but it's very difficult to put a nice protein skimmer on a 2 or 3, 4 or 5 gallon dwarf tank.
Right. And so, we are kind of jumping around here, but actually, let me switch to Lucie real quick, because I wanted to get an idea of so would you consider breeding them again at any point? Was my one other breeding question for you.
For me or for Lucie?
For you, I'm sorry.
I go back and forth. I stopped, when the ESA, when the petition was filed for them to be listed on the Endangered Species Act, and I just have never started back up. We've talked about it back and forth for quite some time, and I'm still in the I don't know mode.
Gotcha. Okay. Really quickly, I want to ask Lucie some questions. Going to kind of switch her up here. Hey, Lucie, tell me about your experience in breeding dwarf seahorses. What have you found to be difficult or easy or?
Well, I start last year. I started from 6 wild dwarf. I collected myself, and I very soon discovered they breed like freshwater guppies. And the hardest part for me is the fact that you have to give them live food on everyday basis. So you have to hatch at least once a day, newly freshly hatched baby brown shrimp. So you have to be very regular about that. And I personally didn't find really difficulties about dwarf, because I like to do daily water changes, big water changes. So I think if I didn't have a filter, I would I wouldn't have any problem. But I have filter also in it. So.
Okay. to interrupt, but folks on Facebook, let me know if you can now hear me better. If not, let me know that too. Okay? I'm trying to keep up with all. Okay, so tell me about what you would recommend as the ideal dwarf seahorse tank setup. Lucie.
It depends on how many seahorse the people, the person want to have, because the problem is you need quite a big amount of live food available in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
But if the tank is too big, the dwarf seahorse won't be able to eat. So it's a balance between the amount of food, the size of the setup, and the number of dwarf.
Gotcha.
And most of the people want to start like with 2, 3, 4, 5. So they basically choose a very small setup, like 1, 2, 3 gallon, and it's here when the problem with water turning bad because of the dead brine happen.
Gotcha. Okay, well, what would you say if someone was interested in not only starting up a dwarf seahorse tank, but their goal was to breed? Because the difference between Dan and Lucie as breeders are that basically, I mean, the basic differences are Dan is a larger scale breeder that is commercial and has been doing it a very long time, has established, really elaborate systems to breed multiple different species, whereas Lucie is a newer breeder, but doing an excellent job with her way. Just goes to show that there are different ways to do things depending on the goals that you have. So Lucie, tell me about, for my next two questions for you are, tell me what your dwarf seahorse tank looks like describe it. What's the filtration? Just kind of give me a rundown on what's the filtration? We'll start with that. How do you filter the tank?
I use a sponge filter.
Okay.
You can see on the picture of the baby dwarf, you can see it on the background. You have two sponge, so you can switch the maintenance and the cleaning between the two. One time the left one time the right one. And under it, there is a little space when you can add biomedia or phosphate removers or nitrate removers, so you can customize depending on your needs.
So, and just for anyone who has not happened to see my video or article, Lucie helped me also with that video and article quite a bit. These two special guests helped me with that article and video. And the filtration that she's talking about can be seen very clearly in that video. And basically what she's talking about is basically having two sponge filters and switching the sponge filters out, and there's a space underneath for extra media. And so Lucie, with that setup, using the sponge filter setup with extra additional space for media, how often were you doing water changes to keep it clean enough so that there was no problems? And I'm sorry, what size was the tank? I forgot to ask that too.
10 gallon.
10 gallon. And how often did you do the water changes?
I do at least one water change every day, depending on the number of dwarfs inside.
Okay.
So I do 50% water change every day.
So 50% water change every day, and using that sponge filtration. And how often would you actually feed the dwarf seahorses?
They are fed constantly. I put a very big amount of baby brine shrimp.
Okay.
And the flow is put in a way that the baby brine can be sucked by the filter, and they are attracted by light.
Okay.
So they are available for dwarf, but they can't be swallowed by the filter.
Got you.
So I can put a lot of them, and if I need to do a water change and I need to remove them, I just easily can do it by siphoning, because they are attracted to the light in front of the tank.
So basically you use that light as a key part of your whole system because the reason that you're able to keep the tank, this first of all, the seahorses fed and the tank clean is because you use the light to attract the food, keep it all in one spot so the seahorses eat, and then you know where to clean, right? I mean, is that basically the idea?
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else because we're gonna keep switching back and forth to see what you both do. And what do you think is the most important? What do you think you? What do you think is the key to keeping dwarf seahorses? I know we're jumping around. We're gonna cover a hobbyist setup, but just in your specific situation, what do you think has been the thing that made you successful?
To be regular in maintenance.
Maintenance regularity.
Like you have to be very well organized to hatch your baby brine, to enrich your baby brine, to do your cleaning, to siphon, to regularly clean the itching posts.
And for anyone watching, two things real quick. First of all, we're going to cover the steps and the basic setup for dwarf seahorses. That is coming. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for our guests before we got into that and their experiences. And what's really cool about this is we have two breeders who are both doing, excellent things, and they might be different scales and experience levels, but the bottom line is they use completely different ways of doing things, but they both agree on most things as far as cleanliness, setup, feedings, and etc. So, Lucie, I will come right back to you. I'm going to quickly switch to Dan. And, all right, we're on Dan. Dan, I know we started talking about your setups and them being bigger systems. With the bigger systems, I think you started to say it, and I may have interrupted or switched the subject, but you basically have bigger systems with a lot of dwarfs, and then you use like a sump with the extra skimmer and all of that to help you with the filtration, correct?
Yes, I treat it just like a fry system. It's
Right.
essentially a 34-inch round, holds 65 gallons filled. I probably fill up to about 40. It drains into a 100 micron filter sock. I've got 670 micron screening on the drain, and then that drains down to a 100 micron filter sock. I use Columnist K1 media for my biological filtration, and then I have a protein skimmer in which I use a SCA 302, and then it goes up through a 5 micron cartridge back to the tank, and it's basically at the flow of the system.
So, I don't mean to keep repeating you guys, but just to let anyone watching know, I will go back after this video is done, after this live stream is done, I'm sorry, and make a video of it, and I will list what they've said they use, just if you're curious or if you're looking, because the problem with these streams is that you've got people wanting to start brand new tanks, you've got people that want questions about how to breed them and, different levels. So I will list these things after the stream. But now that we've talked about a little bit, because I don't expect you guys to give your secrets away, but actually about your particular setup, Dan, I was curious, how do you approach feeding? What do you feed and how often?
Well, we feed them at the same time we feed the other fry. We feed enriched Artemia, which we enrich with Dan's feed. Typically 24, 36-hour old enriched Artemia. And we make sure there's always Artemia floating around in the tank. And then in the evenings, we turn the flow up and essentially flush the Artemia out.
Cool. I want to do a separate episode, so I won't quiz you too much on the enrichment and the Artemia because that's a whole video by itself. But your point being, you said 24-hour at least enriched. How long? That was a question that I did actually get on one of my medias, is if you're using whether it be, no matter the food, if you're using enrichment, how long can you keep the same hatched or bought food as feed? Did that make sense? Like,
Yeah,
when is it bad?
Well, the trick is that In a home setting, you're probably not going to do as much hatching and have as many containers as we have.
Mm-hmm.
So, dig down your hatch, you enrich it, and after you're done enriching it, if you don't want to feed it all out at one time, you do what we call cold storage. You stick it in the refrigerator,
Okay.
and you can refrigerate it for up to 24 hours, and the nutritional value will remain at 95% during that time frame.
Wow.
If you go in the fridge and look at it, you're going to say, "Oh my God, they're all dead," because they'll all be down on the bottom. They essentially go dormant, and their metabolism slows down. Stir it up, pour it in the tank, come back in 5 minutes, and they're buzzing around.
Yes, I've actually done that and noticed that. So I can vouch for that one. I'm crooked. Sorry, guys. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I wanted to kind of let people get a feel for what you guys are doing and how long you've been doing it. But let's go ahead and switch to what you would recommend to someone buying or wanting to set up dwarf seahorse tanks. So the very first question, and now you guys can both answer. Not that you ever couldn't, but if you have an answer, just answer it. But if people are wanting to set up a dwarf seahorse tank, what would your just basic recommendations be as far as, let's start with tank size and setup, like equipment? What would you tell them to get? Lucie, you want to field that one or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I will tell them to maybe start with at least 5 gallon and to get a good filtration. And depending on the time they can give on maintenance, to perform at least one siphoning a day for them.
Okay, and you said, I'm sorry, I don't know if it was my microphone, but I had a hard time understanding. You said did you say at least 10 gallon?
At least 5.
I'm sorry, at
10
least.
gallons is better, but 10 gallon it's quite big. If you put just 6 dwarf in 10 gallon, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning, I'm sorry, that it does absolutely depend on how many dwarf seahorses you're buying. So, first of all, your recommendation for someone going to purchase dwarf seahorses is to buy at least 6, right? And get a 5-gallon tank?
Yeah.
Okay.
For example.
And then how, I think we talked about this before, and I might have to switch to Dan to this one, but because I think you weren't, how do you determine the type and size of sponge filtration for a 5-gallon tank with 6 dwarf seahorses? Like how big? How many gallons per hour? Does it say or?
Are you talking to Dan or to me?
I'm sorry, to you. I'm sorry. I'll be more clear.
I don't mind. You can have a little bit too big filter, sponge filter. You just have to find the right quantity of airflow to put inside to get the filtration. The bigger area it is, the best it is.
So the bigger the filter, the better. Is that right?
Yeah.
And how do you determine the flow in a dwarf seahorse tank? How do you figure out what's too much? What do you watch for? Like, see if they can swim around or?
Yeah, if they can swim around. And what I do is I put the reject of the filter against the glass, so the flow is broken against the glass, but there is still a good amount of filtration.
And for anyone again who has not seen the video or read the article, I show Lucie's filtration system, and what she's saying, it is actually a really good idea for a hobbyist setup in that she's got one kind of like a sponge filter that kind of works like mine in one of her tanks, anyways. And what she does is she points is it a spray bar, Lucie, or no?
No.
Well, if it were me setting it up based on her advice, I would point the spray bar at the glass right next to at the glass so that it was bouncing off of it, creating the flow, getting the filtration, getting the water to the media, the bacteria that's taking care of everything, the nitrogen cycle, but it's not hitting those dwarfs head on. So I'll link the stuff. And Dan, what do you? Let me get over here and switch to you here, Dan. What would you tell people as far as if somebody said I want to set up a dwarf seahorse tank? What tank would you tell them to get? What what would you advise?
There's a tremendous amount of ways to do this. My first suggestion would be to actually find somebody that has dwarfs and look at them and see how big they actually are, because most people are shocked when they first get them and see how tiny they really are. I've seen dwarfs kept successfully in 1-gallon containers where they change the water every day.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen 2.5 gallons, 5 gallons, 10 gallons. What I don't know that the exact size of the tank matters as much as how the tank. I would avoid live sand, live plants. I would go bare bottom. I would go with plastic plants. And people always go, well, I want a natural setup. Well, the problem is other issues. So it's kind of a sterile looking type of a setup, but long term, it typically works out better. If I was setting up a system for myself, I would probably set up a 5-gallon tank with a 20-gallon sump. And if I was to put it in the living room, I'd probably set it across the room and give myself a tripod and a telescope so I could look at them. Really. Or I would take a 20 long and put a divider in it and use the back side as a sump and the front side for the dwarfs.
You said, I'm sorry, what was the last? Repeat the last thing.
I would take the other option I would consider that I've seen done is take a 20 long and divide it off, and basically almost like the biocubes, the back 2/3 would be filtration and the front 1/3 would be for the dwarfs.
And how would you divide it off? With what?
Well, I saw a cool new product with a tank divider the other day. This designed for tanks that I would look into, or I would make my own divider out of mesh material.
Okay. All right. And if you were to try to make the divider out of mesh material, what micron would you choose to keep the, brine shrimp from slipping through constantly and the dwarfs?
Well, you do want the brine shrimp to be able to go through so you can filter it out.
Oh, right. Okay.
So 670 microns, typically big enough for most brine shrimp to go through, but it's also small enough that the dwarfs, the fry, will not go through. And you will have to clean that off because some of the brine will eventually clog it up, but it keeps the baby dwarfs from going through.
Gotcha. And so, again, I will go back and type this all up so that people can read the words that might have been missed because of the audio. I apologize. But so, based on if you we're pretending you're advising me, I'm a new customer, and you've just told me what you just told me. So if I said, okay, now if I set things up as you said, with the bare bottom, with the filtration maybe on the side, etc., what would you suggest as far as filtering the dwarf seahorse tank for a hobbyist?
Well, mechanically, you need something to mechanically filter out the artemia. If you don't filter out the artemia, then you need to do water changes to remove it because the artemia is going to lose its nutritional value. You're not going to be able to do a protein skimmer on a hang on the back on a dwarf tank. So typically, without having a massive filtration scheme, you're going to pretty much have to do what Lucie does and do lots of water changes to keep up. Even though your ammonia levels, your nitrite levels and stuff may be good, your organic levels, your dissolved organic carbon is going to build up, and eventually that's going to create issues.
Gotcha. And so what I'm hearing from both of you, and let me make sure Lucie can be heard still. What I'm hearing from both of you is that anywhere from 5 to 10 gallons. I'm sorry, did you say 20, Dan? Or did you say 5 to 10?
I'm sorry.
I know you said that the size depends on what you're trying to do, but what was, if you were talking to a hobbyist, what was the basic size guideline? I'm sorry, that you said?
Most people are going to go with somewhere that's small, 2.5 to 5 gallons.
Okay.
And because they're going to be doing water changes, it's probably a good idea to go relatively small, and they don't have to use as much Artemia and just rely more on water changes than on trying to create a fancy filtration. Unless they want to go large. If they want to go large, then you can do a fancy filtration scheme, cut back on the work, but you still got to hatch the Artemia.
So what I hear from both of you so far is that if someone wants to do the small setup, then they should make sure that in both of your opinions, bare bottom, plastic plants, and all of those things. Now, if someone actually, why do you suggest staying away from live rock and live sand? And let's let Lucie field this one first. Lucie, why do you tell people to stay away from live rock and sand?
Just one thing, I see there is at least 2 people that think 5 gallon is too small, but I think these people don't realize how small dwarf seahorses are.
Okay, where did you see that? Because I'm
on the comment on YouTube.
Okay, and he's and we do have a third guest, Craig, which I will acknowledge and thank towards the end. Thank you, Craig, now. But he is kind of fielding the questions in YouTube. I'm fielding the questions in Facebook. I promise we're going to ask them. Craig, if you need to interrupt me at any point to ask a question, feel free.
But there's 2 questions I saw. One was, would a round or a cylinder tank be okay? I have no response to that.
Sure.
I don't know enough about them. So they were saying, that one got away from me. That was DM. DM, that was your question, wasn't it? Can you use a cylinder tank?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's actually what Dan uses is cylinder containment units. So
bingo bango. And the other one's the one that Lucie caught, which is about using a small. And I know how small dwarf seahorses are. I have accidentally, well, not accidentally, wrong word. I have had the privilege of seeing one. There was a guy here that tried to keep them, and I kind of went on about there's not enough. There's too much filtration, not enough. You're in a weird state here. Unfortunately, that didn't work out for him, but they were no bigger than my thumbnail, guys.
Right. And so, yeah, the answer to that, and I think, Lucie, I think we talked about before that one of the, and I think Dan also, that because folks, I'm thinking about trying to set up a Dwarf Seahorse tank myself. So if we do that, I'll do it on video, of course, which will be cool. But I just wanted to get as much info out and answer your questions while we can. But both of you suggested small tanks, and when we talked, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the reasons that you want the smaller tank is the question I was getting to about feeding, because you have to provide the right foods. They have to be live, and the dwarf seahorses don't particularly chase the foods the way that the larger seahorses do. So it has to be that flurry, right, where they can always have access to them. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Lucie.
I'm not sure I've understood the end of the sentence you just said.
I'm sorry, Lucie, what I'm asking is, do dwarf seahorses eat differently than the larger species in that you have to make sure the food is always around them so that they can eat it because they won't go find it? Is that better?
Yeah, I personally never see them act like Erectus, for example, when it comes to feeding. They just pitch and they just wait for the food passing by, and they don't hunt like bigger seahorses will do. So it's for mine. And as they have always constant amount of food. I don't know, but I never see them really act like other species of seahorse, begging for food, hunting food in the tank. Not really.
Right.
It-
So, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
If you look at their natural habitat, go out and actually collect dwarf seahorses, and if you really examine a large area, find them where the macroalgae is the thickest, and in the same area where they live is the breeding grounds for all the fishes. It's in the flats and the estuaries. So surrounding them is baby of other creatures that if they move around much, they're open game for food for another animal. So there's for them to survive, they get in sometimes in the thickest part of the macros and stay very still and just wait as the food comes by. And that's how they survive. If they go swimming around chasing down food, they're going to be gobbled up.
What's interesting to me is and I'm uneven again. What's interesting to me is that based on what both of you have shared so far, dwarf seahorses sound exactly like what people think all seahorses are. You know, they think that they are harder to keep, they won't live long, and I mean, no offense to dwarf seahorses, but I'm just saying, and they won't, be very active, and they won't hunt the food. They'll just, so it's interesting that we've come so far with the larger species. Would you agree that what other differences do you see between the dwarf seahorses and the larger species?
Size.
Yeah. No kidding? No, I'm sorry. I'm just being funny. And so to answer the question that was, sorry, I dropped things, but to answer, I think the question that was in YouTube, since I can't see it, basically the reason, just to make sure that you understand, we're talking about the dwarf seahorses, not the bigger species. You're absolutely right. 5 gallons is not enough for them. But for the dwarf seahorses, you want a smaller tank so that you can not go crazy trying to make sure that they have enough food, because they have to have it kind of right where they can get it. And that's a good question for either one or both of you. How do you, is there any measure to the amount that you feed? Like, can you describe, should it look like a snowstorm? Do you do it by time? Because that's what I suggested is, with the larger species, I always suggest, if they haven't eaten it within a certain period of time, you might be feeding too much. If they have, so go ahead. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. The way that we do it is we just make sure food's always available. We look for them to eat it all and for it to disappear and then add more food. Throughout the day, we're making sure that it's always available. End of the day, we're trying to remove the food. So we don't go with a certain type of a schedule or we eyeball it. There are ways you could look up and calculate how much food to put in there. And usually it's based upon, like, for example, like rotifers, I'll tell you 5 rotifers per ml. Well, who's going to pull out a microscope, take a sampling count? You have to eyeball it and get a feel for it.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to look at how the tank is set up, because in some tanks, if you have lighting a certain way, how your flow is, then the artemia may congregate in certain places. So sometimes, like for example, in our tanks, where we have the light shining on the tank, the artemia seems to be thickest at that particular point.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing can happen in a smaller tank, depending upon how the lighting is and what type of flow you have. But the key is it circulates around to where it comes by them, to where they can take it when they want it.
And Dan, Lucie, I do want your response to that question also. But Dan, the way that you provide flow to fry, oh wait, stop the presses. Which wine are you drinking, Dan? I'm so excited. Which wine are you drinking is the real question.
I got my coffee.
Ah, I saw the wine glass. Come on. Okay, we'll let him off the hook. He doesn't drink.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I go Irish Mist tonight.
Ah, gotcha. Well, close enough. Okay. Now I've of course lost my train of thought. But how? Oh, that's right. You taught me a way to provide flow to dwarf and uh, fry tank. Well, for me, fry tanks that I just absolutely love, and I will link something to show a picture of it or something somehow in the comments. But just can you give a basic description of the way you provide flow to fry and dwarf tanks?
Well, essentially, what the flow from the sump down to a very slow flow. And last video we posted on our Facebook page in the group, actually have I captured it on the video where we use a PVC pipe with an elbow, not an elbow, but a sweep on it. And the bubbles coming up from the bottom pull the water up. And instead of it going straight up to the top, it curves around so that it actually acts like almost like a pump and just creates flow within the tank.
Right.
It's, I don't know if there's a special name for it, but essentially it's an airlift that moves water. And we used to do that with the hydroponics to move water in between some of the plants and stuff.
Yeah, I love the thing. It's worked so well for me. But and Lucy, I'm sorry I keep cutting you off because if it with this Hangouts, I am looking for a better way to do these interviews because anytime anybody moves, it messes up the Hangout. It's so stupid. But okay, so Lucy, I don't even remember the original question. What was it? Oh, how do you determine how much to feed your dwarf seahorse tanks?
I just make sure that they have always food available, get loaded baby brine shrimp all the time, all day long. And at the end of the day, I try to remove as much as possible of the baby brine so
Sure.
they can stand in a clean tank for the night.
And actually, that's another question. I saw a post on Facebook, and there was kind of a back and forth about what to feed dwarf seahorses. So you're saying you do feed newly hatched, enriched, not newly hatched, but enriched, 1 to 2 day old Artemia or copepods, or what do you feed and what won't they eat? I guess.
I used to feed wild zooplankton, but I don't do it anymore because of too much risk of hitchhikers, of crab larvae that will set up because of hydroids.
And
So basically, I will use copepods or baby brine shrimp.
Gotcha. And you said, and what you said was that you have had a couple of different issues with collecting wild foods, in that they would cause some sort of problems within the tank, whatever it might be at that point, hitchhikers or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And Dan, you do use collected food sometimes, right? But you have an extensive system that.
Yeah, I don't normally put collected foods in with the dwarfs. The only thing that I put in there with them is the live mysids. And in a round tank, the mysids work extremely well because the population will act as a secondary food source and they play cleanup crew. What's interesting is customers that have tried that in small tanks find that they don't last because the dwarfs will actually chase them down and can corner them and get them. In the big tank, the mysids are too fast for them. In a small tank, I've actually had multiple reports where they say anywhere from 2 to 4 dwarfs would corner a mysid in a corner and all gang up and tear the thing up and eat it.
Wow. Actually, I was just reading something the other day. This is kind of off the subject, but I'm going to say it anyways. Even with the larger species, because I've kind of been wondering and researching why certain species will eat anything almost and will jump at the chance. And I'm sorry, let me really quickly unmute Lucy here. But some species will jump at the chance to eat anything. And basically, the bottom line was I ran out of mysis, frozen mysis one night because I wasn't paying attention or being careful. and all I had was like Rod's Pacific plankton and like really big krill and stuff like that, and then brine shrimp. And some of my seahorses just won't take frozen brine shrimp, even though I wouldn't feed it normally anyways. To the point. The point was, Sean, my boyfriend, was saying, that he didn't particularly like my hippocampus redi because they are so picky. And I said, they're not really picky. They just want foods that look like food, And it was just interesting to me because I read an article, and I will link it if I can find it again below. It was a scientific article that talked about the fact that certain species, at least, of seahorses, they have like the way that they eat has to do with vision, sensories, and all, and smell and all of these things. And so if you throw a bunch of balls of food or whatever, or even if you throw too much food or whatever, they'll stand, like I have my redi will stand there, and if I throw 15 pieces of food right in front of it, it'll look confused and it won't eat any of them. Even if they look exactly like shrimp, it won't eat any of them. And I figure it's because they have to track it, they have to decide on it and eat it. And I don't know why I'm rambling about that, but go ahead.
You have to recognize it as food.
There you go. Okay. And it was just, the article was just interesting because it was something about they have to visually, be able to recognize it and track it and follow it, or else they're going to have trouble. Now, Erectus, they'll just eat anything you put in the tank. But anyhow, okay. So we had started off with saying, and I've got my notes this time, yay me. We talked about size of the tank and filtration of the tank does depend on how many you're going to keep and what your goal is, whether you're planning to breed or not. But both of these special guests tonight, thus far, have agreed to do they have agreed that you should stick to a bare bottom fake plant type system, and that feeding should just be based on making sure that they always have food. So now what would you say, and this is to both of you, we'll switch if you want, but what would you say to someone who just was adamant that they wanted that live setup? What would you say? Or could you help them do it, is the question.
Yes, but Lucie, you want to take it first?
Yeah, you.
So, did you please repeat your question, please?
Yes, I'm sorry, and I'm not asking the questions very well. My
No,
question.
no, it's me.
Well, my question was, if someone approached you and said, I want to set up my dwarf seahorse tank and buy some of your seahorses, and you explained to them how they should set up their tank, and they said, well, that's all good and well, but I want to use live rock and live sand and have a natural setup. Could you help them do that, or do you just think that's not going to work out?
I will tell them, okay, buy some piece of live rocks, kill them, let them dry, bleach them, then start them to be live again with bacteria. And to be simple, start from dry rocks and dry sand, and make sure all the things you had, like macro or snails, stuff like that, make sure to treat them before putting them in the dwarf seahorse tank, because the most common problem with dwarf seahorse is hydroids, and they are pretty easy to get with dwarf seahorse setup, especially because you use very small live food, so they just thrive in a dwarf seahorse tank, and they are very, very bad with dwarfs.
And I have a question about the foods in a second, but just to make sure that I understood what you said properly, what you said was that if someone wants to use live rock and sand, well, they can make it look like they did, but they need to make it not live, clean it, dry it out, make sure there's nothing in it, recycle it, and then you can make a tank look like a natural tank but you have to start with stuff that has nothing natural, basically, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, and then really quick, before I switch over to Dan, I'm sorry, I'll still give you the opportunity to answer this, but with the live foods, whether someone sets up a dwarf seahorse tank, no matter how they set it up, the chances of live foods bringing in hydroids and other hitchhikers like that are very great. So how do you deal with that? How would you tell someone to deal with that, the hitchhikers?
Is it a question for me or for Dan?
For you.
Oh, first start to use decapsulated eggs.
Okay. So you said make sure that when you're hatching brine shrimp for the dwarf seahorses to use decapsulated eggs because they're less likely to have hitchhikers. And go ahead.
Exactly. And your question was how to do to avoid to have hitchhikers, right?
Well, I like if you know that live foods are more likely to bring in hitchhikers that could hurt the dwarfs more than regular seahorses, what can you do about that? What can you do? You have to feed them, so how can you do you just continually treat or what do you do?
Oh, just make sure you use decapsulated brine shrimp and just like in all fish tank, always look closely your tank and your fish to see how things are going.
So just use decapsulated and watch and observe closely. I agree with that. Dan, what would you say to that? How can you do your very best to avoid hitchhikers like hydroids when and different even worse things can come in through hatched brine shrimp when the hatchery is not clean enough. So what would you advise someone about trying to avoid hitchhikers? Like how could they do that with live feeds?
Well, with Artemia, it's not much of a problem. Other things are the problem. But first part of the question, though, was called correctly about setting up a natural setup versus a sterile setup, if you will.
Yes, please. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My response to that is always and never are two words I don't like to see in the hobby, because sooner or later somebody's going to prove that wrong. Um, the real question is what is the risk tolerance level of the person setting up the tank? And if you want to go with a completely natural setup, go with live rock, go with live plants, go with live sand, odds are you're going to have problems. Things like aptasia are going to kill the seahorses. Hydroids can kill the seahorses. Little crabs and things that might be inside the rock can come out and kill the seahorses. So there's a lot of potential dangers. Lucie's idea of sterilizing everything and then letting it recycle in the tank is a great one. That works. You can do it that way. The problem with sand in a tank is the Artemia. When you have a high amount of plankton in there that dies off, the sand gets really, trying to think of a polite word to say here.
Lucky.
It gets so crappy. Um, and you're going to end up siphoning some of the sand out in order to maintain it. So in the end, you're going to find that it's going to be easier to go bare bottom than to go with sand. A couple pieces of dry rock that are used in a dwarf tank, I don't see any problem with that. But if you go with live rock and if you go with live sand, odds are at some point you're going to deal with hydroids and or aptasia. And unfortunately, the method of killing the hydroids kills most of your herbivores and omnivores. Only the carnivores are going to survive it.
And I'm trying to keep my questions more simple. I'm sorry I keep throwing so much at you. What is the method of treatment?
Well, for hydroids, the best treatment, the most effective treatment that we have found so far is Panicure, which is fenbendazole, which is a dewormer that's used on many different animals. It kills virtually almost all species of hydroids. The type that float around with Medusa type stage, very, very low dosing. There's some other types of colonial hydroids that look almost like a hair algae. Those take a stronger dose, but the Panacure will kill those off. The um, Aptasia, entire different story. I just remove the rock and be done with them.
Okay, and so is there anything that, well, you know what? I'm not going to put you on the spot next to you. I won't ask you like specific dosing questions or anything. I got Dan and Lucy's help writing my article. It'll be in the comments. Go ahead.
Well, the dosing is you want to use a liquid Panacure because the liquid Panacure is already dissolved into solution. The granules do not dissolve in water; they only leach out some of the material. But the liquid Panacure is 10%, and it's 0.1 to 0.2 mLs of the 10% solution per 10 gallons of tankage.
Okay, and I want to go back to the Panacure in just 1 second, but my curiosity to you is this: and Lucy, you can answer this also. Please don't think anybody has to wait their turn. This is I appreciate both of your opinions. But I have wondered often lately if maybe when advising people on setting up seahorse tanks, whether it be dwarf or other species, if things do not depend a great deal on where they are from and how they are cared for in the process, and I'm sure everyone can agree that that matters. But my question is, if most dwarf seahorses are not captive bred currently, and people are doing dwarf seahorses, why would they not be more used to things like hydroids that they come across in the wild, or how do they deal with them in the wild? Go ahead, Dan. I think I have.
It's easy. It's because there's a much more wide open space. They're not confined. In a small tank, the hydroids populate, or the Aptasia populates, and it's a more condensed area to where they're going to come in contact with it more often. In the wild, the solution to pollution is dilution, and in the wild, there's hydroids, but the hydroids are so spread out that they're not coming in contact with massive colonies of them. And if they do, then they suffer the same thing. But typically, with the currents and the flows and everything, they're not going to be high concentrations in one given area.
Well, and the other thought that I was having when I was reading about this and thinking about this is that they also, you mentioned earlier that with fry or with dwarf seahorses, nutrition is so extremely important, and in the ocean, unless you're Dan Underwood or Lucie, chances are good, you don't know as much about nutrition for these guys as, like, I don't know as much as I'd like to know, is what I'm trying to say. And so, they probably have more nutrition, a better immune system kind of deal, maybe, who knows, whatever. Anyways, moving right along. Okay,
So I can
so
help Lucy there. I think I know what's going on with her mic. And way to pack some serious horsepower in a laptop there, Lucy. Your camera that's on the top of your screen, to the right of it, that's where the microphone is. Is there a piece of plastic sitting over that? Is this a fairly new laptop? Oh. I guess she...
well,
we'll wait on that. That's fine.
yeah, I was gonna say, Craig, I noticed that it kept cutting off words, so I have also been muting on my end, and
I think it's a new laptop. That thing's got that's got a better video card than I do.
She has a new gaming laptop, so
He sure does. So,
so
off we go. Moving on. Nobody's
when she
anything in the chat, but I know a lot of people are aching to get in. So
yes,
whenever
I'll
you're
hurry
ready.
up. I'll hurry up. Let me ask a few more questions, and I'm gonna go ahead and mute that again. Hang on. Love you, Lucy. If you want to talk, holler somehow. Okay. All right. So, just some really basic questions that are commonly asked and that I was asked to ask. Temperature of a dwarf seahorse tank. What would you advise, Dan?
Low to mid 70s.
Low to mid 70s. Lucy, are you back? Lucie? Okay. When Lucie comes back, I'll try to get her. Okay.
Yeah,
So
we'll get her.
yeah, we'll just move on. Okay. Sorry. And Lucie, I want you to talk, but I sure appreciate you being here and don't want to interrupt your night. So when you come back, somehow message or something to let me know to put you back in. Okay. All right. So temperature low to mid 70s. Lighting. How would you recommend lighting a dwarf seahorse tank, Dan?
Lighting is not critical for specifics. I mean, even ambient room lighting is enough. If you're trying to grow macros in there with them, you're going to need lighting to take care of those. But, you know, fluorescent tube is fine, or LEDs or whatever. It's not critical.
Gotcha. And with macros, we just got done discussing Panicer and Hydroids and etc. Can you treat macro? Someone asked me this, and my experience, just to let anyone who wants to know, is that some, but not all. So it's kind of a toss-up. But Dan, what is your opinion about treating macroalgae with Panicer?
I don't have firsthand experience in doing it because I don't use it, but I've had customers that I've had, you know, varying degrees of success from customers that have told me that they've done it, you know, and I've heard all kinds of different ways that I have yet to come up with a single answer that I can say is going to be effective.
Gotcha.
The problem is that once you treat the plants with Panicer, if you put those plants inside the tank, any herbivores are probably going to die.
Right. Gotcha. I think I mentioned that in the article too. One more thing. We've talked about all of these precautions that need to be taken in a dwarf seahorse tank. So the many people that would prefer, I'm going to stop myself in the middle of my question and just say, if anyone wants help with a seahorse tank setup, the man on your screen right now, Dan Underwood, is not only a breeder of very, very high quality seahorses. Most of mine are from him or Alyssa. But he also is, as you can see, someone who will not tell you no. He will tell you the risks. He will tell you his experience. And then if you say, I don't care, I still want to do it this way, he will show you how and help you. And that's what I love about him. And so, love. Okay, I'll just shut up. Anyways, I'll just stop there. That sounded really good. But okay, my point was, I forgot my point now. I am blushing probably. Okay, so what was I saying, Craig? Oh my gosh.
Listen, you went off on what we like to call a tangent. So there's nothing wrong with that. That happens.
Thank you. See, when you start talking, I get a minute to think, and I got it. All right,
now we know why I'm here. Yeah.
I love you too, darling. My question was, if someone is just adamant about possibly doing a system that is hooked onto their reef tank, hooked onto another tank, one of the systems that flow into the dwarf seahorse tank, I won't even make you answer publicly how you would help them do that, but could it be done? Yes. His answer was yes. He got cut off, but his answer was yes. So if that's something you want to do, it's not something that's particularly promoted, but he could help you figure out how to do that. So I know there's one person that I hope will jump in after I shut up that will ask about this. And I'm going to do a really quick 10-second check to see if Lucie's back. Lucie, you back? Lucie? Not back. Okay.
Nope, not yet.
All right.
Well, I think I got her mic thing figured out. I'm pretty sure that if it's new, I think I know what it is. Yeah, you're talking about DM, aren't you?
What? No. No. I was actually talking about Dev.
And Dev.
Yeah.
Is Dev here? He might be here. Is he here?
No, he's probably not. He was already streaming. I'm just saying he'll watch it later, whatever. If he does jump in, cool. But he's talking about doing some cool things there's no way I could help him with because I would never try him.
Now I
But
got a question from Rip Van Winkle, who's a guy a frequenter of the streams. He's in the Philippines.
Mhm.
He got a question for Dan. Are you in the Canada or U.S.? And I'm guessing U.S.
I think that question was hard to hear. Dan, he asked where you're located.
Yeah, I just typed it in. I'm down at Lucie and I both. You guys down in Florida.
Oh, U.S. Florida. So you guys are down in Florida.
Mhm.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm sitting on the back porch.
I noticed. Actually, I saw the lattice. It's a good backdrop. Lucie, are you there?
Oh, here, wait. I was muting her, so let me unmute her. No,
Well,
she's
that-
unmuted. You
No,
did.
she's not muted. No,
I'll
she's
shut up.
She unmuted herself. But Lucie,
Yeah.
can you hear us? There you are.
Yeah, I'm back.
Your laptop's is it brand new?
Yes.
Up where the camera is on the screen, top of your screen, there's
Yes.
still a piece of plastic over the camera.
No, I removed it already.
Okay, because the microphone's right next to it. So
Oh, okay.
you have what's called an ambient mic on that. You may have to adjust it later because it's meant for that. But yeah, I was looking it up. Stellar rig, by the way. Anyway, moving on.
Okay, for anybody waiting, please bear with me. I have like three to four more questions that we'll do quickly for these guys, and then I'll let you jump in and ask your questions. Okay, so my question to you both is: with dwarf seahorses, I kind of did a little research before we started this, and I was just wondering if dwarf seahorse keepers face the same type of like, can dwarf seahorses get GBD? Is my question. Anybody?
I don't know. I never see
Yes,
it, but I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I say, gas bubble disease in itself, I've never seen what's traditionally gas bubble disease in them. I have seen pouch emphysema.
Okay. All right. Because I saw a post the other day about it, and I just wondered. So, is there anything else? Like, are there anything specific to dwarf seahorses that the larger seahorses won't get? So.
The big thing in my eyes is the hydroids. The larger seahorses aren't going to be bothered by the hydroids. The dwarfs and seahorse fry will be.
Gotcha. Okay, and so is there any particular problem that seems to be the and maybe Lucie, maybe you'll want to field this one too. Is there any particular problem that seems to be more found in dwarf seahorses? Meaning it could be what's the biggest fear? Is it parasites? Is it bacterial issues? What seems to be most commonly a problem with dwarf seahorses?
I would say hydroid.
Just the hydroids. Okay. Hydroids, people. They keep saying it. Hydroids. Pay attention. Hydroids. I'm hearing you. So, really, one of the biggest points before we open this up is that while we can want certain things, if we're trying to set up a tank properly for animals that we want to care for, we have to consider what they actually need and maybe not what we want to see, maybe. And people can have different ways of doing things. There's all different ways. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that if you want to set up a dwarf seahorse tank and you don't want to have to deal with constant heartache and constant problems, what these folks are describing might not be the most gorgeous setup, but they're very cute. I think my seahorse tanks that are bare bottom and fake plants are adorable. Don't get me wrong, I love my macro tanks and I love my natural tanks, but if that's what it takes to be more sure, then just I'll stop myself and I'll just say make sure your risk tolerance checks is in check. Make sure you know the risks, know what you can do to avoid things, and then make the decision whether or not you want to. I guess that's the easiest. And how long, I think I made a mistake about this the other night. How long do dwarf seahorses actually typically live in captivity? Guys.
You want to take the shot first, Liz? You want me to?
I've heard it's about 1, 2, 3 years usually. But I'm too new to Dwarf Seahorse to tell how how is my oldest dwarf. So I can't really myself, with my own experience, answer this question.
But Lucy, you're I'm sorry, Dan, but Lucy, you are a motivator in so many ways because just by paying attention and doing things right, you've exceeded most and you're doing things I'm very proud to have you on my show. So
Oh,
go
thank
ahead,
you.
Dan.
Dwarf seahorses will grow about an inch per year. So you can almost tell the age just by looking at them. And the longest I've kept a dwarf is 3 years. And I would say the average is probably somewhere between 18 months to 2 years on average.
Okay. And do they stop breeding at a certain age as bigger seahorses do?
I'm sorry, you're saying do they stop breeding at a certain age?
Yes, like for instance, and maybe I'm incorrect about this, but based on everything I've read and everything that about the larger seahorses, they like will stop breeding and still live, but just not breed anymore after a certain age. I was just curious if the dwarf seahorses do that, or you
Well,
don't agree with that at all. Go ahead.
not at all, because all of my
Okay.
broods, for example, with Erectus, most of them are between 5 to 7 years old. My Reedeye that I had were adults brought into captivity over 10 years old and still producing every 2 weeks. I prefer older seahorses because they have bigger broods.
Yes.
And with the dwarfs, it's the same thing. A bigger dwarf seahorse can hold more babies.
It's okay. We have children. It's a thing. Go on, Dan. Lucy, just unmute yourself when you're ready. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
No, that's pretty much it. I disagree with that. The seahorses will breed all the way to the end, as far as I know.
Well, I've learned something new because I knew they took breaks, and maybe my really old male rectus is just on a break. But would without making myself look bad here, is it possible that people that think that seahorses stop breeding at an older age, because is it possible that it's because something's maybe not right with the tank and that's really the problem? Yeah, okay.
The tank, it could be the diet, it could be a number of things. As a
Mhm.
breeder, I usually have multiple pairs because not all pairs produce. And it's frustrating at times because you put a pair together, you wait, they don't do anything, so you sell them. 2 weeks later, the customer calls you and says, "What do I do with these fry?" Sometimes just the change of the setup, the partners around. There's any number of things you can do, and also like they aren't getting a good diet, aren't being fed properly, uh, or if there's something brewing inside of them that's very slow, you know, sometimes a parasitic or bacterial issue that could come into play as well. Um, but most of the time, it's each seahorse is going to breed differently. There's people that get erectus and say every 2 weeks like clockwork. There's people that find out they're seasonal. There's people that have never had them. Just know. Um, and if you change the setup, move them somewhere else, it may turn into an entirely different circumstance.
Okay, I'm going to ask two last questions of you guys, and then I'm going to let other people get in here and ask questions. I just wanted to make sure that I asked the questions that people pre-gave me. So, first question is, if there, the way it was worded was a tad confusing, but if there were one thing you could say to avoid the most when setting up for dwarf seahorses, what would it be? Would it just be the hitchhikers again, or like I can't think of how they really even meant it. Okay, let's just make it easier and say if you could, if there was, what would you say to, what is the key thing that you would like to say to people getting ready to start with dwarf seahorses? What would you just say to them as someone doing that? What is your words? Dan, go ahead if you'd like, or Lucy.
Dan,
I'm sorry.
go on.
What was the question again?
I'm sorry, guys. I was trying to figure out how to state this question, so I'm just going to make it more generic and say if there was one key piece of advice, would, whether it be make sure you avoid hitchhikers, whether it be make sure you're feeding well, make sure you're keeping things clean, or is there no key advice and you have to look at all of those things?
My key advice would be number one, if you're going to keep dwarf seahorses, you're probably going to do a small tank, so do lots and lots and lots of water changes. And number two, learn something about the food that you're going to be feeding them, the artemia, understand it, know it well enough to know how to catch it and do the proper things with it, bacterial counts down.
And I'll tell you now, I completely intend, because I want to learn a little bit more about it. Chad helped me, you've helped me, Chad from Reed Mariculture, however you say it. Both of them have helped me, and you have helped me tremendously learning about live feeds, how to keep them clean. We're going to do another video or stream about that to help people. But Lucie, if someone asked you about dwarf seahorses, what are the key things that you would tell them to consider?
I'm totally agree about what Dan just said, but I will add that be sure you can be constant with maintenance, because it's a key for dwarfs. And if you're not able to hatch very regularly your baby brine, if you're not able to siphon the tank, if you're not able to do the water change on a regular basis, you will gonna have a lot of problems.
Gotcha. And so what I've gotten so far, and I was a little nervous doing this first interview with some top dogs, so I apologize if I missed any questions. And we're getting ready to let you guys come in and ask anything you want and show anything you want. But what I'm getting from this is just basically to make sure that, maybe dwarf seahorses are not best for a brand new person to seahorse keeping or saltwater, because while people look at them and see that they're inexpensive, they're small, it's a smaller setup, should be easier, it's really truly not. There are a lot of things to consider, and while I'm not saying don't keep them, heck, I'm going to try to keep them at some point when Lucie gets me some. But, research, make sure that you understand it, that just because they're smaller, they're not easier. They have to have live foods. They have to have enrichments. It's a little, I personally, would you guys say that dwarf seahorses are more work than regular seahorses or not? Lucie?
I think it might depend on your setup, on the volume of water, the number of fjords, but yes, because you need to hatch your baby brine daily, you need to enrich them, you need to feed them, you need to clean the tank, so basically, yes, I would say it's more maintenance than a regular seahorses.
And Dan?
Keeping dwarf seahorses is like having a perpetual fry tank.
Yes, and you said that, and I didn't mean to make you repeat it. Just no. One last point is that it's now when you get up here and you're in my stream and you're answering questions, it becomes a little easier to understand why maybe I stumble sometimes, because it's really difficult to answer because there are so many different ways, so many right answers, and it depends on what you're trying to do. So these two, first, before we bring people in, Dan and Lucie, I thank you so much for being on the live stream, and I have learned a lot. I will type up the notes from this for anyone who wants them, and maybe put a link in the description. And Craig, let's go ahead and let folks in if they'd like. You can post a link. And is there anything else, Dan and Lucie, actually, I'm sorry, that was so rude. Is there anything else that you would like to say to people about dwarf seahorses?
You want to go first, Lucie?
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry. No, I said, is there anything that you want to say to people thinking about setting up for Dwarf Seahorses that I have not asked you? Like, is there anything you want to say to people about
Yeah.
Dwarf Seahorses?
You ask them, are you ready for slavery?
You can't say that live, Lucie. Jeez. No, I'm just kidding. All
She
right.
absolutely can. She wasn't inferring anything. It's a
Okay.
slave to your tank. We all are.
You're right. You're right. Okay. And Dan.
My response to that is that people buy dwarf seahorses. Don't buy them because they're inexpensive priced seahorse. You're getting yourself into a world of trouble. Even experts, when I used to track the customers that bought dwarf seahorses from me, a large percentage of them lost them in the first 90 days, at least the first ones they bought. Some of them bought more and figured it out and were able to keep them. But even some of the experienced seahorse keepers have problems keeping dwarf seahorses. So they're not as easy as many people like to lead you to believe. They really should be for an advanced aquarist that is already familiar with the foods that you have to deal with, and your cost of setup when you get through figuring your brine, your hatchers, and all the different little doodads and whatnot, you're going to find that it's easier and just as inexpensive to set up a 30-gallon tank for a larger pair of seahorses.
Very good point, and I was listening. I was just sending the link to anyone who wants to join. So if anyone would like to join the stream, Craig is going to post a link in YouTube. I will post a link in Facebook. And if you cannot get to the link through Facebook, you will have to go to YouTube. You should be anyway subscribed to my channel because we're going to do cool things like this from now on. And Sam, you know, people like Sam, come on in. We're going to just chat now. I've done my interview portion. Now, if someone has a tank they want to show or a question they want to ask about their specific setup, I see DM Reef jumped in quickly. Hi, DM.
How you guys doing?
And I'm going to refill my glass, folks. So, Craig, you have the
I
controls.
do have a question from your Facebook page.
Someone what?
Tank. Sam, you have hydroids in your reef tank, and you were asking what kills them.
And I will let them field that, but yeah, in a reef tank? Ooh,
Nope. Well, if he has it in a reef, yeah, reef tank's a whole other beeswax ball of chains here, guys. But yeah, I guess Dan.
Sam is actually a wonderful, wonderful lady.
Oh, is it oh, well, there we go. Sorry.
It's okay. And I asked this question of Cruz, so I will let Dan and everyone answer while I go refill my glass. But okay. Cruz, no, actually it was Dan. Dan is the one who told me the answer. So I'll let Dan answer. What could someone do to hydroids in a reef tank, Sir Dan?
Well,
he doesn't want to say.
No, the hydroids typically feed off plankton. So you can starve them by cutting back the food and reduce the population. But
she forgot to mute herself. Sorry, Dan. Keep going.
That's okay. If you try to kill the hydroids, the only substance I know that really gets rid of them effectively is Panicure, and Panicure is going to kill off the corals. So it really isn't an option to use Panicure in a reef tank.
Now, would that be because it's extremely? Is it kind of like using copper in a reef tank? Same kind of deal. It's extremely hard on invertebrates or something, or?
Yeah, it's a dewormer.
It's like Interceptor. Yeah. Exactly. Yep, gotcha. So there you go, guys. Same problem we'd have with getting rid of red bugs on acros, right? Interceptor. So go ahead, DM. I know you got questions. I know you're chomping at the bit.
Yeah, I got a question. So I heard somebody say about a cylinder fish tank versus maybe a rectangle fish tank would be more better for them to swim like in a circle versus running into like a wall, so like a smooth surface. On top of that, if you were to run a bigger sump, I mean, obviously more volume of water is more stable for them, and then filled that up with tons of different like macroalgae, and then had their cylinder tank up above completely filled in with obviously no substrate, and then put a bunch of macroalgae in there and run a small, probably would say 10 gallons an hour, kind of like a pump, just to kind of bring that up from the bottom of your sump. Which I'm trying to do is play this in my head right now. So basically, what I was going to do is, if you took the setup that we normally have on a saltwater tank, but keep the same volume of water, like say a bigger sump, 20 gallon or 10 gallon cylinder tank, and then downsize all the pumps so that it's not heavy flow on them. That's basically what you guys were getting at in more ways than one, right?
More or less. Look at look at how it's designed. When I come off the pump, I go into a T, and part of that goes to a bioreactor with columnist K1 media, and the other part goes to a cartridge filter back up to the tank. During the feeding hours, the water is more than a trickle, but it's barely. I bet it's not a gallon. I have two, and coming into the tank during that time frame. The large volume of water keeps it stable, and then in the evening hours, I will turn up the flow as much as they will tolerate. And sometimes, because of the water in some ways is too fast. The advantage of the round tank being that there's no corner keeps everything in suspension much better. There's no dead spots.
Right.
Uniformly, and drain in the center, especially once you crank volume and get a little bit of a spin going, everything goes to the center, and you're able to, it's essentially less maintenance. Stocking density has been proven in agriculture that you can go much higher densities in round and rectangular square tanks just because of the flow.
Okay, that makes sense. And then with all that macroalgae, though, Dan, that's why you wouldn't have to really. Do you still have to do water changes, you think, or can you get away with it?
Now, what people don't is when I talk about, I'm talking about organic matter in the water.
Okay.
Will help remove inorganics, but they don't help remove the actual organic matter. When a seahorse eats, they suck in the food. The food comes in through the snout. It to some degree gets macerated. On the large, it looks like what's almost like smoke coming out the back of their head. Well, about 8% of the food that goes through the snout comes out through the.
Yeah, I heard you say that last time, that they'd only digest like a third of the whole food that they eat or something, if that.
Correct. The problem is that you have your organic loading of the tank with both dissolved and organic matter increases drastically. And if you don't remove that, then the only way to get rid of something to eat it and turn it into plants can then deal with it in whatever form of nitrogen it goes through.
So what would you put in there for it to eat if say you couldn't? Well, I guess if you don't have sand, you can just go in there with like a little siphon hose, and if it's in a circular motion in that cylinder, it's all gonna accumulate somewhere within that cylinder.
Right. That's the big talk about is microscopic stuff that you can't see.
Honestly, with macroalgae, I personally dose iron and magnesium weekly for them, and they're growing really well. That's what I do for them. A lot of the corals in my tank I have are from the areas that these macroalgae are from.
So you're saying that, what would you put in there, Dan, for them to eat that stuff that we don't see? What I mean, obviously it's not hermit crabs or.
There's two. Okay. One is mechanical removal, which is one, water changes, two, filtration being designed to remove it. 5 micron filtration. or a protein skimmer goes a long way in helping. The other way is biologically, is for something to eat it. That biological something is going to either be bacteria or protozoans. And as long as it's good bacteria, you're good to go. But as soon as that flora changes, you no longer have any dwarf seahorses.
No, I got you then. Okay, yeah, protein skimmer. I mean, put an oversized skimmer on so that the water that does, but the inside of the cylinder, you can always like, if it ain't, you can like stir it up a little bit if you have to, you know what I mean, to get the particles within the water column to make it into the sump where the skimmer is, or
During the daytime, you're feeding. Evening hours when they're not feeding, lights out, they're going to bed down. They're going to hitch, reach the water. You'll take much, remove a lot of it out there. It's, you know, depends upon to the size.
Hey, Dan, can you mute yourself when Dan's answer? Or Dave, can you mute yourself? Exactly. Yeah, because what's happening? It's cutting out Dan.
I did it. I'm so sorry.
Nope, no. It's just so that when Dan doesn't get cut out. Dan, go ahead and start over, buddy. Literally, you were getting cut out. It's just his mic is what's called dominant. So for whatever reason, it's doing that. So
So
go
can
ahead.
you repeat? I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
Start from I was able to hear the part. So everybody in the stream, make sure that you're muting. If you ask a question, mute the microphone afterwards so that we can hear the answer. And the question was, I believe, what was the question? DM, ask your question one more time. Oh, I remember. I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
I said that about the skimmer, oversized skimmer, and then if I wiggle all the particles in the water column to help get it down to the sump, and then he stated that they feed during the day, so on, so what forth, like that.
Right. So evening hours, you're simply turning up the flow, so you have a turnover in the tank for the mechanical filtration.
Yeah, he got it. He got it.
Hey, you know what? I have a question, and if anybody else does, I'm not certainly not trying to interrupt, but I completely forgot to ask you about, and if it's already been asked, call me silly and smack me around, but I completely forgot to ask about a very crucial question that many people talk about, and that's tank mates and coral. Would you suggest putting tank mates, any of them, are pipefish okay, or anything okay, in with dwarf seahorses? And that's for anybody here, Dan, Lucie, anybody.
Pipefish will gladly snack upon dwarf fry. The very first time that we set up a little tank with some dwarfs, we put a couple pipefish in there, and real quick realized that wasn't the thing to do because they were having a great snack. In terms of corals, I would not mix the corals. Dwarf seahorses are nowhere near corals. They're found in the estuaries. They're found in the grass flats. They're not found on the reefs.
And of course, you know, hitchhikers and stuff like that, parasite stuff.
Now, as far as tank, you know, I put it as the mysids. People will put it like that. You're very, very limited with them.
I'm so sorry, Craig, if you have any ideas why it's breaking up so badly, but what I heard was Dan said, for anyone who couldn't hear him as I couldn't, that the dwarf seahorses he personally only puts with the mysids, with the shrimp. And I did not hear the exact reason, but basically I'm guessing that it's because it's just, what's the reason again? Can you repeat? I'm sorry.
Should I restart or something? Am I breaking up?
Yeah, you could go out and come back in, Dan, and it might actually correct you because you're cutting out really weirdly. I'm not sure why. welcome to Hangouts, folks. We all know what that's like.
And we are
But-
looking for a better alternative, guys. I thought it was because people kept, I know with mine, if I even move, it will cut people off. But
It's
Dan,
always possible. Yep.
just Dan in the Hangout, hang it up, and
And
then
then follow your link back in like you did before.
yes.
How do
Put your cursor over here. I'll try to show you on the actual thing. Do you see the cursor? How if you do the cursor up here, can you see that at all? No.
I don't get a picture of you on my iPad.
I
No,
know, but you're in the Hangout. If you put your cursor in the middle of the top of the screen, a little thing should pop up.
Yeah, and want to look like a phone handle, classic phone handle, and you just leave the call and then come back in.
Ah, there he went.
You got it.
Okay, he'll be back, guys. I'm so.
Well, I got questions
Wait,
myself.
he came right back. Did that count?
Yeah, no, it didn't. He's just leaving now. That's what's happening. So there.
Okay, Dan, if you
No.
need the link again, let me know. But you should be able to.
He's not going to hear you.
Well, he will on the stream.
If you,
Silly.
well, no, he is what. Well, you shouldn't be listening to that on the stream because then it comes back through your microphone. But yeah,
I'll send it to him again. Go ahead.
maybe Lucy can answer the question. I was wondering about lobster eggs. If those are small enough, because I know mandarins will eat them, and I was wondering, has anybody ever tried that with dwarf seahorses, or is it too nutrient dense?
Try what? Lobster eggs, you said?
Lobster eggs.
Oh no, I never tried, but why not? But it's
Yeah,
not-
it's just, yeah. I know it's not. It may or may not be their normal food. There's Dan. You're back, Dan. Try your mic, my friend. There's Tina.
Hey.
You need a headset, Dan. I'm going to send you one. Yeah. No. Now his mic's not working. What the heck's going on?
Do I need a headset?
I would say get a headset. It just will eliminate the external mic issue. We can't all afford what Lucy's got.
Right.
That's a heck of a laptop. I was looking that up and I'm like drooling about her video card. I'm like, oh, check that horsepower out. And it's got a GTX 1050 Ti in it, for God's sake. So
I know. I'm gonna go steal Lucy's computer because I got a new one and it sucks.
Try it. Just try.
oh, I know. I'm a gearhead, right? Me and Colby. You probably remember Colby trying to help her out last time, and it's we're just gearheads. There we go.
I know you want to ask Dan about the. Let him get situated. Oh, he's getting on a headset. Look at
There we go.
Dan going
Watch, I'll-
strong.
There we
Is
go.
that any better?
Much
Oh.
better.
Much.
There you go.
Thank you, Dan. Sorry for all the trouble.
So Dan,
All right.
I was asking, can you feed dwarf seahorses lobster eggs? Because I know that people have had great success with mandarins getting them to eat that, and they're a notoriously finicky eater.
Well, you can feed them anything, but getting them to eat it's a different story.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Not to be a smart, you know what, but
We
You
all
know,
have.
it would be extremely nutritious for them. I don't think that they would recognize it as a food and eat it. Sometimes we do get dwarfs to eat a little bit of frozen food. And earlier, Kelly was talking about the reed eye and putting food in there and them going crazy. I've worked with food manufacturers trying to come up with non-frozen food for seahorses. And we've experimented all kinds of different things, even stuff that looks like mices that to feed them that they wouldn't take. But I also have seen done experiments where you could take pellet food and drop it in a tank. Just take a couple of pellets, drop it in the tank, and you see the seahorses looking around trying to figure out where the heck the food is. They don't recognize the pellets as food, but they know that food just came into the environment. It's weird, but dwarf seahorses, you will often hear people say, well, I've heard they can train them to frozen. Yeah, they'll eat frozen a little bit. And most commonly, cyclopes is usually the thing that they'll take, but
Right.
they won't stay on it permanently.
So my other question that answers that, I was just curious. Can you keep H. erectus in 20-gallon long for a tank?
Can you? Yes. Should you? No.
Okay. Well,
Long
go
term,
ahead.
you're probably not going to be successful.
Okay, so it's going to be a nutrient dense issue, or
Yeah, it's too small of a water volume. Unless you're going to be doing massive water changes on a regular basis. For the same footprint, I would go for the 29 gallon.
29 tall. Okay,
Yep.
gotcha. Yeah, and we were discussing, I don't know if you caught it in the chat, but sea dragons.
Yeah.
Is anybody having any success rearing them in tanks right now? Or not rearing, but like keeping them that you're aware of?
Keeping them, yes, but it's not your average hobbyist. The first problem is the size of the tank. And, a friend of mine who breeds live foods for a living got a pair. His had a custom built fiberglass tank that was 8 feet tall, and I forgot 4 or 5 feet round, and he felt it was too small. You'll hear of them being kept in 100, 200 gallon tanks, but when you talk to people that are really familiar with them, they'll tell you they need more space. Of course, there's a difference between the Wheaties and the Leafies, but they need more space. I also saw somebody posted something about ornate pipefish.
Yep.
And at some point, I will probably go after them and breed them. I've had a couple of public aquarists that have promised me some, but I've yet to see them. I think they're doable. I think there's a much better chance of them becoming available in the hobby once we learn what we need to do to take care of them properly. But I think that the Wheaties and the leafy sea dragons really, it really aren't for the average hobbyist. Some of the public aquariums, I was talking to one, their budget for their dragons was $50,000 a year for maintaining and feeding them.
Isn't that crazy?
That puts most of us out right there. Shoot, we're done. Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's including veterinarian costs and foods and everything. They're very prone to mycobacteria, and they're also prone to urinema and a couple of other ailments. And unless you really know what you're doing, it's really rough to go out and spend $1,800 to $3,000 for a fish to, turn around and then you got to have a vet come in, and then you're going back and forth, and your whole life is consumed trying to take care of that one animal that's very, very expensive.
Yeah, exactly. So Tina, you're in here, and glad I could help you out getting in, because I know Android's not playing friendly with the YouTube links right now. So did you have any questions?
Hi, not really. I just came in to
extol your love
a little bit. Huh?
To extol your love of seahorses.
Yeah. Because I'm setting up a seahorse tank, so just not dwarfs.
See, and we always want, Tina, you're always welcome. I don't care if you just want to chill. And, it's because of, I hope, some of these conversations that, you've chosen larger seahorses. And I have nothing against dwarf seahorses. Like I said, I think that the plans that Dev is making and has made will work out. And he's going to revolutionize dwarf seahorse keeping for hobbyists. It's going to be awesome and great. But it's just, for the newest new seahorse person, they just, the larger are so much easier. So
yeah, I was gonna say I want the larger, hardier version, I guess, to start out with.
Well, and why wouldn't you want to start out with something that's going to give you a greater chance of success, right?
Right.
That's the same thing when I get people that come to me about mandarins, and I'm like, well, look, you can keep a mandarin in a relatively new tank. It's just a lot of work on your part to go get pods, and I mean, and they're not even as bad as I think it was you, Kelly, that told me 3,000 per day for dwarf seahorses for pods and amphipods and whatnot. And when you think about it, a mandarin's 500 on average. Right. So and they're challenging. You know what I mean? So that's one of those things, right?
Hey,
what about, if I can interrupt just for a sec, what about mandarins that eat frozen?
Now, the trick to it is if they can get to it. So the trick with the mandarin is one, getting it where they can get at it, because they won't chase food. They go, if you've ever watched a mandarin, they're very deliberate eaters. So they get on the rock, they go where they go, and they look for it, and their vision is very acute to it, and they peck. So I'm going to try a trick that Mark Levinson loves Reef, if you've ever heard of him. I'm trying to get a hold of a glass bottle, like a Snapple bottle, a bottle that's big enough that if the mandarin goes in, he can turn around and go back out, because they don't swim backwards very well and they tend to panic. So you have to make sure the bottle's big enough that they can go in and out. And what you can do is load that bottle so most of the fish can't get at it, but he will go in because he'll smell it. And then if he identifies it as food, they'll eat it. I had one that ate Hikari marioness pellets, and the flow was low enough at the bottom of my tank that it would sit there. And exactly, Lucie, you got it, right? If they'll eat it, don't let that fish go, because a lot of them don't. Now, I've been waiting on the ones to come from Bali because they're rearing them on flake food.
Right.
But it's been, I don't know what's happened. Same thing with the coral beauties they were breeding.
Biota is supposed to be breeding mandarins that are trained to frozen food already.
Yeah, that's who I'm talking about, Bali and Biota. I think Biota is the company, and it's in Bali, I think. I'd have to look it up. It was on Reef Builders.
Right. Now, I was just wondering, because I've contemplated as doing that maybe as a side project.
Yeah, it's a, the better that they do. I think Haley F has hers breeding on a regular basis. So they do the love snap. They go up together, and then there's a little flurry of biological goo, and then blah blah blah. She's never had any successfully go. She thought she did, but they're so tiny, I guess, when they first start, that it's almost impossible to see them. But it's one of those things. Like I don't steer people away from them. I just let them know they are a difficult fish. They do demand your attention. Whereas right. My fox face, if you've ever watched my stream, Dan, everybody comments on how fat my fox face is. I mean, the guy literally looks like he has trouble swimming. He doesn't, right. But that's what he looks like, right? I don't have to. Is my mandarin? I watch her like a hawk. I know mine's a female, and she's okay, but she's starting to slim underneath the chin. They call it. She's not quite as bulgy as I would like her to be. So I'm going to start on that in the next couple of days and see if I can get her to transition to eating frozen food, because I'll pollute my tank more to make sure she gets what she needs versus, and try to target feed her, get it down there, get it right where she can see it. And because my scooter, he doesn't care. That dragonette just swims around and eats everything that's in front of him. So,
right.
By comparison.
No, I've been trying to come up with ideas of what other tank mates I could breed that could go with seahorses. And the idea of, in a typical seahorse tank, a mandarin that's trained to eat frozen food seems like a good idea, because the seahorses probably are not going to be the same dynamic as in a reef tank where the fish are just going nuts after the food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got it. And actually, a mandarin's a very docile fish. The most they'll do is put their fin up and like, hey, my food. And, off they go. So, yeah.
And that would be so awesome to be. I mean, I know there are a few places that sell captive bred mandarin, but yay! I'd love to see Seahorse Source do that. Go on, but I'm curious. Not to interrupt at all, but I'm curious how you guys feel. I know that it got onto mandarin, and we can continue talking about that, of course. But I'm curious how you guys feel about when you were discussing the dragonfish and the ghost pipes and stuff like that. How do you think that it's a problem that they are available to people without the experience? And go ahead.
Yeah, the big issue is nobody really has a lot of information to go on. And, well, there's a couple of issues. Number one, they're a cygnathids, so they have an entirely different immune system. They're very sensitive. They're subject to things that are different, and they go through massive handling before they get to someone. I think with the proper care and understand, if one could figure out and understand their needs, I don't think they would be difficult to keep. Now,
Right.
what is their requirements? That we don't know, and that's going to take some experimentation. I do know, and I think it was Richard Ross that did it. I know they have been bred in captivity,
Mhm.
at least one species, and I know they can be kept in captivity, but trying to get your hands on a good set of specimens to start with is extremely difficult.
Exactly. And you know, I'd love to see more of these type of fish available to hobbyists, but I don't know. I just struggle with the fact that I see them for sale to anyone, and I see anyone be able to buy them, and then then the people that are collecting them aren't trying as hard to provide quality specimens to the people that could actually work with them and captive breed them or whatever and make them available because they're available to anybody, and they just get a bad rep, just like seahorses, get a bad rep for being so difficult. And
Well,
I just struggle with it.
yeah,
Go
there's a
ahead.
lot of things in a hobby that are sold that I think probably shouldn't be sold to people. I mean, a horseshoe crab. I mean, eventually, if they keep it long enough, he's going to get too big for the tank.
Hmm.
Same thing, some of the sharks that people buy and put in a tank, eventually they outgrow it. I mean, there's a lot of things that we should reconsider what we put in our tanks because they simply get too big. And then what do? Some people, the lionfish, for example, you know, how many of those have been let loose? How much of it is from hurricanes destroying something? I'd be willing to bet you the majority of the problem that we have with lionfish out in the Atlantic is from people releasing them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's an article. I'll link it below. There's an article about that specifically on Masna.com. But yeah, I struggle with it a lot because on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, actually, I would really like, if you're comfortable, if you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to, but I would love for you to tell people how you got into seahorse breeding. And before you start, the reason is that there are programs like Marine
Oops.
Breeding Initiative that actually support you, even if you are, no matter where you are in your experience, they'll support you and try to help you learn as fast as you can to do a better job with whatever you have bought. But if people would research more ahead of time, they wouldn't be stuck in that position. So I just struggle. But when you hear Dan's story, if we didn't have people doing that, then we wouldn't have anything. So I'm curious of others' opinions. But go ahead, Dan. How did you start breeding?
How, well, I, I, I guess the easiest way to say is I backed into it. I was doing it entirely. I was in private aviation. The company sold, and I had visited my sister several times, who was one of the original breeders at ORA.
Mm-hmm.
And she kept talking about seahorses and whatnot. And I had this crazy idea that once the company that I was working for sold, I would cash out and we'd sail down to Florida and start a business. And I'd be the salesperson, she'd be the breeder, and away we'd go. Um, well, when we got down here, circumstances changed. And next thing you know, it was just my wife and myself. So for 2 years, we just experimented and tried. And despite that was in 2003, and despite the poor track record with seahorse breeding, we were determined that we could do it, and we did do it. And once we did it at the hobby level, 2005, we raised our flag and said we are a company, and here we go, and have been at it since then. Um, to me, I was supposed to be the salesman, but once I had to get involved with the seahorses, I took a look at the challenge, and it was quite interesting to see all the different information that was conflicting with against each other. I was reading scientific articles that said one thing, but I was observing something else, and it was just a huge challenge. And everything I've ever undertaken has always been a challenge. I mean, in the private aviation business, essentially it was 5 vacuum cleaner salesmen that decided we could make more money selling jets than vacuums, so we started an aviation company. Um, we didn't know a single thing about planes when we started, but we turned around and sold the company. It just I like the challenge, and until I lose my interest in the challenge, I stay with it. And I have to say, this is the longest I've ever stayed with anything is doing seahorses because I'm still learning. I'm still challenged, and there's still so many more things that we can, do, learn, and progress with. Whether it's the ornate pipes or whether it's the Wheaties or even just among the different seahorse species, there's a tremendous amount of stuff that we're still learning. And I get amazed sometimes when I sit down and start reading some of the peer-reviewed studies of the, the, the different details that come into play and how intricate it is for a fish that has not evolved in millions and millions and millions of years.
Yeah. And I wasn't trying at all to put you on the spot. I'm sorry if I did, but just
Nope.
my entire point is that the opinion of this channel, because it's mine, so I get to say so. The opinion of this channel is, just before you go and do something or choose to buy something, please, please, please decide what your goal is and what you're willing, or what your risk tolerance is and what you're willing to do with it. Because I'll be the last person to tell some hobbyist or newcomer like little Dan in 2000 whatever, don't you dare go get seahorses because you're wrong. Thank God he did, because now it's done so much for captive breeding and for seahorses. So, if we told everybody not to do it, then it would be terrible because we'd never, go any further. However, if you're not looking to try something difficult, and if you're not looking to try to do something good with it, then maybe leave that to people who will, if that makes sense. Was that a good way? I don't know, because we're not the seahorse police here. Craig, I know you have a lot of thoughts about tang police and stuff, and that's not at all what I try to do, but we provide guidelines because they work. And say if you're someone who wants to try to expand things, so be it. But
Well, if you saw did you see my last video?
I
And what
haven't.
the whole tang thing. Yeah, we're not the fish police. When my LFS guy, he knew he was selling fish to a guy with a 55-gallon tank, and these fish were 120 plus gallon fish, but he was buying them small and then selling them off. But the thing that props to the guy for at least selling them off when they started to get too big. But what he was running into were aggression issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you try to explain to him, it's not that you're so busy asking why you can't, you don't ask if you should. You know what I mean? That's all. That I've never ever said to somebody that they can't do something. Just should you do it, right?
Yeah.
What's the responsibility as you as a hobbyist, as a providing the husbandry.
Mm-hmm.
So, the whole trick to it is, and the way I look at it, like my blue Pacific tang, aka hippo tang, aka regal tang, depending where you are in the world, he's mental. He's not unhappy. He's just mental for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
He decided to grab a hold of a skunk cleaner shrimp, bite all of his antenna off, and then kill him.
Mm-hmm.
There's a point in which you have to draw a line, and where you draw the line sometimes is very difficult. I often get people that if they were to pose the question on a forum or a message board, people would try to crucify them for what they want to do.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Now, instead of taking that approach, I try to explain to them what they have to overcome instead of that it can't be done, but this is the challenges you face. Now, at the same token, I've also had requests where I flat out refused to do business with people. As an example, I had some type of a golf event with a ceremony where they wanted to put a seahorse on every table, and somebody from the table got to take the seahorse home.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Let's do some betas in a bowl. Oh God.
Right. Well, essentially, that's what they were willing to pay much more than what I was, my retail price to do it, and in the end, I just flat out refused. Then they asked, well, what if we return them afterwards? And I'm like, guys, you can't put these guys in a wine glass for a day and a half and then give them back to me. That doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So, there is a place where you have to draw the line, but, you also have to look at the person's intent, because
Right.
I've had people
Mm-hmm.
that have had want to do some stuff that's pretty off the wall, but their intent was to make the animals do well. If, by the same token, I've been approached by film crews who want to do something and their intent wasn't for the animals, it was for the show.
Gotcha.
And, sorry, I'm not doing that.
Well, bravo to you. Thank goodness. Yes, I'm so glad. And yeah, I guess my message personally to hobbyists is, don't do something, if a breeder like Dan or your own personal research leads you to believe that it's going to be more difficult than you're willing to do, then don't do it. Seahorses aren't hard. The bigger seahorses aren't hard, but when you're talking about dwarfs, if you're not going to be willing to, provide the live foods, make sure that it's enough that the live foods are enriched. If you're not willing to either, add a sump with a huge, filtration underneath a small tank so that they can get their food, or do daily water changes as Lucie does. There's ways to do it, multiple. But if you're not willing to do that work, go with the bigger seahorses or go get you some Nemos. And that's, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I say it all the time. There's many ways to skin a reef.
Right.
There's many ways to do it. There's no one way. There are givens. There are things you're going to do. Like DM, who was in here, he has like one of the most fantastic looking reef tanks I've ever seen.
I love that tank.
I'm jealous of that tank. Every time I see it, I just want to bang my head and go, I'm never going to get that, right? But we were, I was talking to somebody who's not a hobbyist, Colby, who I know Kelly knows very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what's funny? He goes, what? And I said, you said, oh, well, you got that big bill, the tank. And I'm like, well, not really. It's already there. I've already paid for it. I said, I pay for the electricity to run it. And especially since I run 2, possibly 3 coming. But you know what I mean? It's like, it's the stocking. It's the, I had a big thing when I started off, and I think a lot of people do in the hobby. I ran out and bought corals. I started buying corals right away. And I had some general success and everything. But when things started to go horribly wrong for me, and it seemed like no matter what I tested, I couldn't find the cause of it. And I lost about $3,000 worth of coral in the span of a very short amount of time. And just killed me. It was all euphyllias, and it was all rare euphyllias that I'd gotten a hold of. So,
Man.
Yeah, it just blows. I almost quit. I was done. I'm done. I lost all my Australian, euphyllias all at once, and all bailouts. No brown jelly, nothing to really say what happened. They just all didn't like the tank. It could have been lighting. It could have been this, we've conjectured at what could have been. And it's like, well, guys, it's well over a year and a half ago. I couldn't tell you. I didn't keep the readings. But that being said, there's a part of me that's just really into this hobby. It's really into keeping it. And I think I get the zealots, the ones that we don't want you in the hobby. We want this elitist jerk mentality, where we don't want you in it, right? And it's, and they're like, well, that's not it at all. They're going to kill the fish. Well, that's not your decision to make. You made mistakes. How many fish did you kill? How many corals did you kill before you figured it out? You know what I mean? And yeah, go ahead, Dan.
It's funny because I remember way back, Seahorse.org used to be the big forum for seahorses back in the early 2000s. And I remember a girl had succeeded in breeding a few seahorses and she was going to sell them. And she was asking people to fill out an application to buy her seahorses to make sure they qualified.
Okay.
And, my attitude and my feelings towards it is entirely different. Over the years, what I have found is that the newcomer, the newbie, if you will, that knows nothing about tanks is going to have probably a 90% or better odds of succeeding with the seahorses. By the same token, the average reefer is probably got a 50-50 shot.
It is. Yeah, it's about that. I'd agree.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because the new person is going to listen to everything I tell them they need to do, and the reefer already knows a lot of stuff that he's going to discount what I say.
Gotcha.
Well, then I think very well then.
Yeah.
Tina's going to rock.
I hope so anyway.
Killed that crab, though. Crab killer.
Hey, that was the devil. That was the devil.
No, it was the devil.
It was the devil. Yeah.
It was the devil. That was the best. She had a what was it? A pebble crab.
These are pet. Well, my LFS actually said it was a gorilla crab after they looked it all up.
Gorilla. Yeah, he looked like a gorilla to me, but I was taking your word for it. So there you go.
Oh Lord.
Right, they're a
big difference between a pebble and a gorilla, isn't there?
Yeah. Pebble only gets Pebble at full size is about 3 inches and still a nasty customer. A gorilla, well, there's a point you can cook them and eat them.
Yeah, that's
get big enough. Yeah, I think
the claw was as big as my thumb.
Yeah,
as big as the thumb. That thing was huge.
Yeah, it was definitely a gorilla crab.
It weren't done growing.
Nope.
I'm sorry.
No, if you ever watch Matt's reef tank, when he had one, he literally had to tear his reef down to get that guy out, and that was a big reef tank to tear down.
That's what I was thinking I was going to have to do, but we ended up not having to do that. So
that's all right. Well, who was it I was talking to today? I think it was Nick, and from Aquarium Cabinet Solutions, and the guy said he had a crab, blah 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 blah, and he goes, "Can you identify it?" And he goes, "Well, what is this?" And he's holding it up, and he had speared it, and it was an emerald crab. So he killed an emerald crab, thinking it might have been something bad. Yeah, exactly right.
I'm not ignoring all of you. I'm trying to share this because I'm hoping that I didn't mess up in the sharing somehow, because I know for a fact that Destiny wanted to come and join, and she's not here. So I'm really, like she said, I'll see you in a little bit. So I'm not ignoring you. Please feel free to chat. Lucie, what you doing?
I do have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Tina. Go ahead.
When it comes to the hippocampus, the larger ones, when I do set up my tank, I've already started cycling it and stuff like that, and I've got some rock in my sump. Dead rock, it's all the dry stuff. Can I make that a natural reef setup for them with live sand, etc.?
For the larger seahorses?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I got bad news. Just a sec, Dan. I hate to cut off. I got to go. I did have commitments. I didn't know we were going to go past 2 hours tonight.
Oh, wow. Jeez, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So I do have to go, but everything's good. Everything's running fine. The volumes are good.
Okay.
And
I'll keep chit-chatting with the folks still here for a little bit longer, and then we'll close her down. But thank you, Craig.
Not a problem.
I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. And you guys, thanks. Hey, Lucie, Dan, nice to see you. DM and the rest of you. Love seeing you guys, and you guys have a good night. All right, later,
Thanks,
taters.
Craig.
Bye.
Hey,
Later.
really quick, I did want to say also, DM, if I ran you off with my muting, I really apologize. I was just trying to figure it out. So please don't feel that I don't want you to come in. I was just trying to make sure everybody was heard. So, and Dan, go ahead and answer Tina's question. Sorry.
I think the question was starting off with essentially dry rock, dry sand. Can you turn it into live stuff? Correct?
Actually, no. I've got live sand. It's dry rock.
Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The dry rock will eventually become live rock in the tank.
Yeah,
I know. Won't be
I
bringing a bunch of hitchhikers in with it, but that's perfectly fine. And each tank is set up based upon the individual's desires. What I try to coach people in is that, if you go into a live fish store, the first thing they try to do is tell you that you need to put 25 tons in a 10-gallon tank of rock. Seahorse tanks, I have a tendency to use a lot less rock and a lot more macros. That's more of their natural habitat. And when you're setting up a seahorse tank, think estuary instead of reef. Seahorses are not a true reef creature. They're more of an estuary type creature and often found near reefs. But you'll find if you were to take a tank, for example, and set up rock on one side and macros on the other, you're going to find the seahorses in the macros, not on the rock. The rock, however, is very good because the rock does provide some biological filtration, both for nitrification and denitrification.
Yep, I understand all that. So as far as the macro algae, what are the best kinds to get and where would I pick those up?
Okay, I will refer you to Where first, and Where is live-plants.com.
Okay, I've looked there.
And as far as which ones, there's a matter of personal taste, and then recommendations from others. I don't keep a lot of macros. The only time that I've used macros, I've used Caulerpa prolifera, which is my favorite because it looks like a seagrass. But there's many other types that can be used and do the same thing.
Okay.
If you're asking for a specific one, which one's easier, which one grows faster, I'm going to have to mark, E for do not know.
I do. What was the question? Can you say it one more time? I'm sorry.
Actually, I was just wondering what I'm sorry if I'm trying to holler. I got a train going behind me.
You're okay.
What macroalgae are the best for these bigger seahorses? What do they like?
For the bigger seahorses in the display or as nutrient export?
Either.
Okay.
What do they like? What do they like to hitch on and stuff like that?
Okay. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. In the display, I will go ahead and agree with Dan about Caulerpas. However, the reason that you hear so many people say to avoid Caulerpas is because once you put them in, you're just not ever going to get them out. It's going to be very difficult. They spread quickly and they grow so quickly and they're so good at nutrient export that if you try to put any like pretty macros in, then they will, the pretty ones won't do well. Not that Caulerpa's not pretty, but you get my point. If you put Caulerpa in, it will do great for nutrient export. It will do great for looking natural. It will do great for hitching and so on, etc. But that you're going to have to stick to fast growing algae at that point on. And a lot of times, it just can grow so quickly that it becomes a problem harvesting. I like to use Caulerpas in my sump. There are specific species, like I think he mentioned prolifera. I might be pronouncing it incorrectly, but the long blades that look like twisty leaves, those are great for display because they're not as bad as some of the others, and they do provide nice hitches. In my tanks, I really like. Sorry.
What was the name of that one again?
It's Caulerpa,
Prolifera.
Thank you.
I'm talking about the long, stringy, grassy one that you were just talking about.
No, that's what the prolifera. I'm terrible. You know what, Tina? I'll actually send you a listing and how I use things as soon as we're done here, or well, maybe tomorrow. But because I can tell you exactly what grows faster because I've done it all. I like the red grape because it grows and looks like a tree, and they love to hitch on it. I don't want to take up all the time, but I can get with you and send you my, what's worked for me.
Okay. And what about softer corals and stuff like that I would like to put on the rock?
Dan?
Like what?
Oh, did he?
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Which corals would be okay? That would
Anything
not
that
hurt.
does. Well, two things. Number one, the corals cannot sting the seahorses, so you don't want anything that stings the seahorses.
Yep.
Okay. The second thing is what can handle the seahorses roughing them up, because seahorses are going to take their tail and intuitively or instinctively, I should say, when they come up against something, they wrap their tail around it.
Okay.
And so they're going to rough it up. Mushrooms do real well. There's some other types of colonies of corals that will do well with them. But
stuff that's pretty low to the ground then?
Yes, something that's low, something that
like
doesn't have tentacles, something that doesn't sting, and something that's quite hardy.
Okay.
Tina, same thing with the macros. When I look at what I'm going to put in my seahorse tanks, I do have one or two that have like soft coral, toadstools, mushrooms, things like that in them, and gorgonians. I use gorgonians all the time, but I make sure that The thing that the only thing about softies that I try to be careful about, same with macros, is that if I add something like, say, green star polyps or Kenya trees or whatever, things like that, I personally don't typically add, only because I don't want them to take over the tank and be all over. But they don't
Yeah,
hurt the seahorses,
yeah, no GSP and no GSP or no. I have that stuff in my reef tank, so
Right.
there be no Kenya trees and no green
Yeah.
star polyps in my seahorse tank at all. It is forbidden.
Yeah, I hear you. I have a tank that's quite successful still, that has I've got pictures of even fry next to it, which I shouldn't advertise, but with toadstool, the hardier kinds that aren't going to slime all the time, and then
How do I
mushrooms.
know how do I know which ones don't slime all the time?
Uh, you don't. It's just watch it. That's the main thing. Is if you add something that you have looked up and or somebody like me has said, oh, they work for me. Look, if you get one, first thing, if you're able to, I really recommend quarantine, just so that you don't.
I do.
Okay,
No worries.
then we're good there. Quarantine it for as long as possible so that you know, and that's how you'll know. That's what I say about everything. You'll be able to see how it reacts to certain things by keeping it in quarantine. If it slimes a lot, maybe throw it in the reef instead of the seahorse tank. If it has aptasia, if it has hydroids, whatever, throw it in the reef. But yeah, with mushrooms and toadstools and stuff, it's more of just, as long as you have the knowledge to deal with it. If it, like if a toadstool starts shedding, as long as you have the knowledge of how to deal with that and not let it cover everything or not mess up parameters, or if soft corals if you know to put carbon in, if the soft corals look pissy, that kind of thing. As long as you know that stuff, you'll be fine. In quarantine, you'll be fine.
Awesome.
Any other questions? I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Typically, when Seahorse Savvy, I think it was, I wrote them as well, and I didn't think to ask them this. Do typically, when you get your seahorses from them, are they relatively healthy, or do they come in with parasites?
No, I'll tell you something. Myself and Seahorse Savvy, I would probably put on equal ground in terms of health, in terms of the seahorses coming in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alyssa and Kyle actually came down and visited me before they started and spent quite a bit of time here going over different things, asking different questions. And it was funny because when they left, I've had many people come in, visit, examine things, and talk about starting up and doing different things. And when Kyle and Alyssa left, my wife Abby turned around to me and said, those two are going to start up and succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And she was correct, and they have. And the nice thing about they have, the one advantage they have over me that is a tremendous advantage, is that they've worked in the industry much longer than I have, and they've worked with corals, they've worked with different fish, and their basic knowledge of the overall in the hobby is greater than mine. My knowledge set is very limited in terms of, if it's seahorse related, I probably have the answer. If it's something else, I might have the answer, but probably not.
Okay.
And
Nice.
I
just didn't know like what types of things I should look for, like if they're sick. I'm relatively new. I'm not new to one. I'm not super new to having a reef aquarium, but I am new to the seahorses. So I would like to make sure that, when they come in, like, are they susceptible to ick like the fish are?
They
Or,
can get
within,
ick. They can get ick, but the ick, when they get ick, it's going to be in the gills. It's not going to be visibly externally.
okay.
And a lot of people think seahorses can't handle copper. They can. but it's pretty rare to see ick on seahorses. But I'll tell you, if you're getting seahorses from Alyssa Seahorse Savvy or from me, you should expect them to come in clean and healthy. And I can't speak for them, but I suspect they're probably very much like I am. That if you get a seahorse from us and you have a problem, the first thing we always ask you to do is contact us, give us a chance to help you remedy the situation, because 9 times out of 10 we can. And if we can't, at least in our policy, our written policy is arrive alive. Our informal policy is, if you contact us and you can't resolve it, we're going to make sure that you're squared away in the end, one way or another.
No, that's awesome.
I
But
wanted to. Sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to interrupt. I wanted to say that is why I am such a big promoter of captive bred seahorses. There are good vendors. I'm not saying there aren't. If the seahorses are treated right in the chain, that where they come from, if they're not having to go through basically hell to get to you, I'm not even. I have no judgment. But when you buy a captive bred seahorse from a breeder like Dan or Alyssa, they don't, you don't have to worry about so many other things. Like, they don't need to. You have to understand that these seahorses were raised from, little teeny tiny babies all the way up to the big seahorse, the nice sized seahorses that you get. And so if there was any kind of problem, they would have already know it. And they're not going to sell it, huh?
Yeah, I was just helping you finish that sentence. That they would already know that if there was anything wrong.
Yeah. So, and they eat the frozen. You don't have to wean them. And, quarantine is always a good idea just because you can get to know them and so, etc. But definitely elicit. Go ahead, Dan.
our reputation is at stake. And, our replacement rate is a fraction of less than 1%. The time of year where we have the biggest problems is around Christmas, and we're each year we're extending the time where we stop shipping before Christmas because of the shipping issues. But when it comes to shipping quality specimens, it's not in our interest to ship out stock that's going to cause a problem. And one of the most complimentary things that I can say about either them or I is try to do a search and try to find negative reviews. And you'll find that you're hard pressed. Even people that have problems with their seahorses from us don't put up negative reviews, because we make sure that we take care of them and get everything taken care of so they're happy in the end. Any store you go into, you can go in any store and buy something and say they're a great store. It's not until you have a problem that you really find out how good a company is. And I think you'll find that both Alyssa and I will try to make sure that you're very well taken care of.
Nice. Yeah, I can't wait to have some spoiled pony. Because if Craig was still in here, he could probably hear me say this too. He knows as I am OCD, and I have a hard time not doing water changes on my bigger tank. So this will help aid me with it, because I love doing my water changes. I don't know what it is, but it gives me something to do. So I will have no trouble at all doing the water changes that need to be done on this tank.
Awesome.
At any given time, I'm usually helping 3 to 5 customers, or I won't say customers, 3 to 5 people a week that are dealing with either a sick seahorse or some type of a problem where I'm having to spend time on the phone with them. And I do that with non-customers as well as I do with customers. Sometimes, well, I say sometimes, 99% of the time, it's not related to a problem that we had. It's something they did on their end. But our goal is to make the people happy. And if we make them happy, they're going to tell other people. And, for the longest time, we've survived on word of mouth advertising. And that's, without that, we're done.
Hey, Tina, also, just to add on to that, the other thing about buying from someone like Dan or Alyssa is what you're getting right now, where they're helping you with all your questions. Like, I just want to tell you, when I bought my first seahorse from Dan, the poor man had to probably talk to me 10 times a day. And
Oh,
yeah, and they will though, because they care, they want you to succeed. So if you say, oh, it looks funny, and call them, they'll help you. And so that you usually don't get that as well with, you know, with other, go ahead.
Sometimes it's real easy. Sometimes it's real difficult. You know, my nightmare is when I sell to a school,
Oh
you know,
gosh.
where, I've got the person who's buying the fish, I got the person who's taking care of the fish, and then I got the other people who are taking care of the fish. And then because they see something, they, oh my God, this isn't right. Or this, trying to settle them down and learn and understand what to expect is difficult when you're talking to multiple people.
yeah.
My fear when I came on Facebook was if I came on Facebook, I was worried about different people saying different things and what could happen. And when I started the group, the same thing. But I also realized that it also was an opportunity for people to see how we react to situations in terms of dealing with people. So what I thought was a negative can turn into an actual positive where they can see that we really will take care of the customer and help them out and get them squared away.
There you go.
For Tina and for anyone watching, I promise I'm going to rewatch this video or this stream and make sure to link every single thing that I say I'm going to link in the comments. But I will link Seahorse Source, who is Dan, one of our special guests. There is now
Okay.
he made a group called Seahorse Sources Group on Facebook that is just
I'll look
like,
that up.
yeah, and I'll put the link in the description. It's a great group, and he's a breeder. You can buy in the group, but it's not like one of those constant sales. He does a question of the day where he asks a question and lets everybody talk about their opinions, and we get to learn from each other. You post pictures, questions, problems. So it's a really good group. I'll link it in the comments, and yeah. So
Well, the primary goal of the group when I started it was experimental, but I very quickly realized what my advantage was, and that was when I looked at all the other groups, most people that joined groups joined to learn. And I felt like most of the groups didn't do enough teaching, didn't provide enough technical information. And that was why I modified the group to where we came up with a topic of the day so that the primary objective of the group was to put out information to help people take care of their seahorses, answer questions that come up without having to post the same thing over and over and over in different groups.
I'm sorry, I wasn't meaning to ignore. I was Ray, whom I promised to make sure he got a link, and I promised to tell him in advance when I was going live again. I completely forgot. So I was trying to show him how to get in, and it might be next time before he can. And of course, this is
You're talking about Ray Ford?
yeah. And so this is this, but this is. Go ahead.
I said,
I'm
come
on now.
in.
If you can hear me, I don't know.
I can hear you, Ray. You're in here, and I'm gonna
I've got my camera blacked out, but I was just wondering. Excuse me. How do you get the picture? Boy, that's a good night. How do you get the
Sorry.
pictures up instead of having the camera view?
If do you mean like how
Like I don't see you. It says seahorse, and I see a picture of a seahorse.
Mhm.
And there's another one that just says Lucie on it.
Mhm.
Mine just has a black screen, doesn't say name or anything on it.
Gotcha. It's because it's a Hangout. It's a Google Hangout. So later on, if you to be completely honest, I don't plan to use this specific format for very long. But in the meantime, if you just wanted to set up a profile picture and stuff, it's kind of just like a forum. And if you, I'll show you later. But if you go
This isn't
to,
what you had the other day. I was
um,
watching you the other day and I couldn't participate.
I'm trying to remember. I think. Oh, the
I
other
think I
day.
I clicked right on from
Facebook.
the Facebook page.
Yeah, the other day I was playing with Facebook, just going live directly to Facebook. This one is actually through YouTube, and it uses a way for multiple people to join in and talk. So it's a hangout, and I'll send you the link to kind of look it over later. I'm sorry I didn't explain that better. I kind of do things differently, trying to find the best way. But this is
Well,
the way.
don't worry about it. Like,
No worries.
I'm not always going to be available just when you're doing it anyway.
Sure, of course, of course. Well, I'm so glad you came in though. Have you?
Well, I started to a while ago, and then my granddaughter showed up. She was over at the gym, and she stopped in on her way home.
Gotcha.
And I don't get to see her too much, so I stop everything when she gets here.
Well, absolutely. I would never want you to go, not spend time with the granddaughter. Hey,
I have to interrupt and say hello, Ray.
Hi, Dan. I wish I'd had some time to get down there to see you in person down there, but following you on the Facebook and through the websites has been the best I could do.
Well, I'm glad you're on here, and I'm glad that you're taking a look at the Facebook, because obviously the other forums have died down. For those of you who don't know, Ray and I have known each other on the forums for a very, very, very long time.
Nice to meet you.
I still can't forget that day you called me many years ago, and we were on for God knows how many hours on the phone, or it just seemed like that, and it was all at your expense, and you couldn't even make any money off of me.
Oh.
Well, I do what I can to help when I can.
Boy, that was a shocker. I couldn't believe there were people like that anymore in this world.
Exactly.
I ran my business that way, but I never found anybody else around me or that I've ever been connected with that ever did anything like that.
And
I make sure when I'm posting about people to people in the States that I've brought up that particular thing, that you called me at your expense to help me, and I was unable to buy from you being up here in Canada. I sure would love to have, but anyway.
That's the awesome part about someone like Dan and a breeder like Dan, because he really actually cares and wants to help people, and that's what his groups and stuff are all about. And just for anyone watching, Ray, I won't tell his names on forums because that's not my place to do so. But Ray and Dan and Lucie actually are on some of the Lucie's on Reef.com, Reef Central, Reef to Reef, on all of those places. Dan and Ray are guys who have been doing this seahorse thing for back before, a long time. We won't give away the age either, but because they're both such handsome young gents. However, they've been doing this.
I wish I had something comparable with Dan there. I might have a little bit more hair up front, but I don't have that youthful look.
You're both awesome. And they both give such good, they help people constantly. They're both coming to Facebook, even though it's, not what they're used to. And they're both trying to get used to even coming on the stream. I mean, that's such a big thing for them to do. And they're coming out because they want to help and because they want to share their knowledge and their experience with seahorses. And I'm just so grateful to all of you for doing so. Lucie, you too. So
it has been a challenge for us to get into the more technical side, I guess you could say. Sure. But Ray, I'll tell you something. Losing the hair, I didn't like it. Hair turning gray, I didn't like it. When they told me I had to wear bifocals, I cried. Fortunately, they came out with progressives.
Well, I have 2 pairs of glasses on right now.
No.
I have distance glasses, and then I have some flip glasses. They flip up and down. They're my reading glasses. And everybody, I don't know how to say it. Everybody seems quite perturbed that I wear these things that look so stupid. But when I tried bifocals and trifocals and the graduated lenses, didn't work for me. And I was using dollar store reading glasses that I would put on over top of my regular glasses in order to do my reading. And so then when I was at the optometrist one day, I asked her, I've seen sunglasses that you can flip up and down. Can I get a pair of those? And I'm going to just take and drill the dollar store lenses that'll pop out, and I'll fasten them onto that flip frame. She said, oh, well, you can get the glasses already like that. So now I have the glasses like that. I just modified them a little bit so they work better.
Hey,
I
DIY, it works for anything. Go ahead. Sorry.
I get extremely jealous of my sister who has the visual acuity to see, the proverbial fly on a bear's nose at 2 miles away.
But that's what sisters are for.
She looks at things in the tank and says, I see this and this and this. And I'm over there grabbing the microscope trying to figure out what the hell she's talking about.
I was gonna say I'm sure Lucie and Tina have no idea because they're young, but I'm feeling very grateful to be a woman.
You're pretty young too, from what I've seen.
Well, I was gonna say I'm feeling very grateful to be a woman right now because they've even come out with little things that I can make my gray hairs look brown. It's awesome. Being a chick is awesome.
Kelly, I'm not young.
What? You don't look like you have to cover the gray.
I'm turning the big 5-0 in a couple of months. I'm not young.
Well, I turned 21 again May 9th, so But, hey, Ray, how are you still working with the Barbori since we have you on here?
Yeah, I still have those in the abs.
Yeah?
I got them last June. I forget the date, middle of June somewhat. And I lost a male ab 6 weeks after I got them. 2 days before I lost him, he gave birth, and the fry were all dead when he gave birth to them. And then he died 2 weeks later. And I had no sign of anything being a problem or anything. There's been no problem since, other than nobody is producing any. There's still 5 left in there, 2 males and 3 females, but there's no production at all. The abs, I've had no losses there other than the fry. I had 9 batches of fry, varying from 1 or 2 per batch up to, I had 1 batch that had 60 something. Never got any to live. But I went through that with the reed-eye many years ago. And it was the 10th batch before I succeeded. And then after that, I didn't have any problem yet. I'm not aware of having done anything any different. So I was trying to blame something else instead of me. So I was putting the blame on the fact that the seahorses maybe weren't viable, weren't able to produce viable fry until they got to a certain stage. Maybe I wasn't given a proper enrichment or something, but anyway, after that, I didn't have any problem. And then with the Erectus, when I brought those ones in from Seahorse Corral, then I was raising those as well. And Dan, you had a visit from a friend of mine, Yvette.
Yep.
So would have been nice if I could have got down there at the same time, but I can't travel well anymore with my spine gone.
Well, Seahorse Corral, of course, is no longer there, but I used to actually, when she used to export, I used to actually sell her seahorses to export.
Yeah.
But the Barbary, we're all having the same problem. In talking with several different breeders that have brood stock, where it's a universal problem right now that we're having issues and we're not getting breeding. And my preliminary thinking is that we're probably dealing with some type of internal parasite such as urinema. And my suggestion would be to go ahead and treat them with metrodiazonol.
I can't get anything anymore without paying an enormous sum. It's minimum $80 to go to a vet. And then depending on what they have to do to check out, it goes up from there.
Can we send to Canada?
You can't buy anything anymore in Canada, formalin or anything.
Jeez.
No, you got to be real careful shipping over the border with different things. It's like I get people all the time asking for the Dan's feed with probiotics and why I can't ship it overseas. I can't ship the bacteria. I can ship Dan's feed regular, but I can't ship the probiotics. And the
Yeah.
same thing with medicines. You have to be real careful. You can end up in a real legal pile of you know what.
Gotcha.
But Ray, you have no way of obtaining metrodiazonol up there?
Not that I know of. I do have a little bit. They come in tablet form that I bought many, many, many years ago. Metro. Oh God, I can't think of it.
I
I have
know that.
non-cognitive impairment, and I have a hard time getting words out sometimes.
No,
Yeah.
you're
A
fine.
Metro of some kind, but I don't remember just what it is. But when I did use it, with my marine system, it never did anything for me.
Right.
Like I got
Well,
this before I started the Seahorses.
right. Well, metrodiazonol is it's actually the trade name for it is Flagyl. It's used a lot in humans with certain issues, particularly with females, and with peritonitis and with certain gut issues. Um, have You might want to ask the guys at Seahorse Canada if they have access to it and if you could buy it from them. I
About
will
all
say
I could
this.
get from them, they actually started up with the Seahorses I brought in from, yeah, what's her name? Seahorse Corral.
Right, Beth.
She got 6 of that 100-horse order I brought in. That's what they started up from.
Right.
So
Well,
I'm in contact with them.
I actually did a lot of consulting work with them to help them get started.
Yeah.
They, from my perspective, they seem to be really nice people.
Yeah, they are very nice. I haven't met him. She was the one that came to pick up the Seahorses when I was dividing them up down there in Toronto.
Right.
But I have talked with him with email a few times now. And when I was bringing in the barbs and the order that I was bringing in from Australia, I wanted to find out if they wanted in on a shipment there too, because it would bring the unit cost down.
Correct.
Like the shipping cost alone for that order was over $700.
That's cheap.
Hey, I don't mean to interrupt, guys, but I wanted to say, Craig,
Yep.
the guy that helped me at the beginning of this stream and is a great help to my channel, he's in Canada, and
He's in where?
Canada. That's where you said you are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He tends to know things, so let me try to help too. I just wanted to say that Craig, remember when you see this, then I need your help with this. So that's it. Go ahead. Go on.
Was that with getting the antibiotics?
I'm not saying he can do anything or knows anything, but he just
Yeah.
seems to know people in Canada that would be able to do something like that. Yes, and he's more in the reef hobby world, but he is a very helpful person. So
Even post on some of the forums that I go on. There's 2 basic Canadian forums of any significance, and so I go on them each day. I go on them, even though there's little participation on my behalf anymore. The reef situation has left me behind, so now I'm basically just participating when I see something about seahorses, as long as somebody hasn't already said what I'm going to say anyway.
Sure, and before anybody else says anything else, sorry to interrupt if I am, but Ray, I definitely will I'm going to message you because I have read some of your articles on phytoplankton and culturing and live feeds, and they're excellent. And so I definitely want to invite you back as a guest, and I'll make it on your time when it's good for you. But I want you and Dan both and Lucie, all of you guys to come back and talk about live feeds sometime. Because
that all started before I even got into seahorses.
But they're
from my reefing days.
But they're good articles, really good, and I'll try to link those too. But anyhow,
I'll tell you something cool though. I got an email.
I'm grabbing something over there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, just keep talking. I'm grabbing something.
All right. apparently at the Signathed bio, whatever they call it, thing they had, they're asking, somebody contacted me and asked me to help them co-write, I guess, the protocols for sterilizing Artemia for live feeds for seahorses, based on the protocols that I've been doing.
Well, usually I end up going back to what you've posted to get information to pass on to people. I think I have so damn much stuff bookmarked, but I never can remember where the hell it is.
I'm the
And
same way.
the big problem
Well,
I have with
it's
Facebook,
not just the bookmarks, Ray. I've got so many bloody articles that I need to go back and reread that I just don't have time to sit down. And the problem is that when I start reading, I find something that's interesting, I look it up, and I find something else that's interesting. The next thing you know, instead of me, looking at one thing, I'm looking at something entirely different. And,
yeah,
it
I
just,
go off on tangents like that too.
it's difficult sometimes. But one of the nice things is for me is the topic of the day is forcing me to focus a little bit more on a specific topic. It's like I just did the article on the weak snake. I need to do the same thing with formalin and a couple of other things that I need to put up there so that it's readily available to people, so that I don't have to sit there and keep repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating it.
I saw a post where formalin's starting to get hard in the U.S. now too.
Well, it has gotten difficult because of the change from the government status from may cause cancer to does cause cancer.
Yeah,
And in reality, formalin, when you look at it, if you inhale it, it causes all kinds of problems in the nasal cavity, the bronchial tubes, the lungs, and if you inhale enough of it, it can cause pneumonia. But realistically, from skin contact, our bodies, virtually every animal on the planet produces formaldehyde. The difference is we rapidly convert that to formic acid. So in some respects, it's not as dangerous as they make it out to be. In other respects, it is dangerous, especially if you're breathing it. And what the government was trying to do was stop the use of in all the building products. I mean, some of these new homes were built to where the formaldehyde levels that you were inhaling were very high.
yeah.
And, people, I got a customer that was extremely afraid of formalin. And I said, look, do you wear makeup? She said, yeah. I said, well, you've been putting formaldehyde on your face. Formaldehyde has been used in makeup. It's been used in making medications and everything else. Most often it's evaporated out, but it's ever present in our environment.
Well, the biggest thing I ever saw it used for was all the fish stores used to have a small 2.5 gallon aquarium, and they'd have it full of water with formalin in it. And when they were done using that, then they'd throw it in that tank of formalin water just to sterilize it before using it in another tank. But anymore, I don't know what they're using now.
Well, what I found is you can still get formaldehyde 37% on Amazon, and I think you can get it on eBay as well. And people get confused, and this is where it really gets confusing, is that 37% formalin is considered 100% strength. So that's 1,000 milligrams per ml. And the difference between formalin and formaldehyde is a gas. And when it's mixed into water, people think of it as formalin. It's not until that the methyl alcohol is added that it's really formalin.
Yeah.
And then you see 10% buffered solution of formalin, and people think, well, that's 10%. Well, it's kind of archaic, but the 10% is a buffered solution for a fixative. So what they used to do was take 10% of formaldehyde or formalin and mix it with 90% of sterile water. So in reality, it's 3.7%, not 10%.
Yeah.
So the dosing becomes tricky. And I've had a couple customers that have ordered the 10% that I've had to sit down and calculate the dosages out. And I'm trying to work on an article currently on how to do that. But it's it used to be you could buy, Cordon sold a product. There was, I don't know, a half a dozen different companies that sold formalin, and now they've all backed away from it because of the liability issue.
Yeah.
The government says it does cause cancer, so now it's a huge liability.
Well, there's nothing good going to come out of too much government regulation, but there are certain things where I don't think they go far enough.
True.
So, it seems to be always, how do I say it? The things that matter the least is what they control the most.
That sounds like politics to me.
Well,
No politics, boys.
you mean
No.
like NASA not being able to investigate the?
Oh, Lord. Go ahead. You're fine. It's fine. We're on a free-for-all at this point, folks, if you'd like to join. Sam's trying to get in, but go ahead and keep talking. Keep talking.
Well, Dan started about the same time I did, I believe.
Yes, we'll blame Dan.
He carried it a lot further than I did. I was a lot older getting into it, but we started around, I think it was 2002, 2003.
Yep.
That's 2002 is when I first got the interest in it. And I figured, well, I'd been doing all this reefing for so many years, and every time I go diving, I see everything else. But one time I saw a seahorse, and so that got me interested in it. And it took me a while to actually do it. Same as with the reefing. I'd been going on holidays down to the islands all the time, and every time I go, there had to be a reef nearby that I could go diving on.
Oh, I'm jealous, but go ahead.
I'd come back and say to the kids and that I'm going to switch over my freshwater tanks over to saltwater, and then never ever do it. So back '93 for Christmas, they gave me gift certificates for a store here in London that had salt water, and so in January, right after New Year's, I started making the switch. So I switched a 30-gallon over, and then another 30, and then I bought a 90, and then another 90, and then some 75s, and a 65, and 55, and a bunch of 40s, and stuck it out until I got into the Seahorses, and I used the 40s for the Seahorses. But with my health being what it is, I've had to make a decision, so I dropped out of the reef tanks. I guess probably because I'd already had reef tanks for a long time, and the Seahorses were still new to me and still interesting. And whenever I've got to learn about something, it's a challenge, and that makes it even more interesting.
Absolutely.
So that's, as long as I can still keep doing it, I'll keep on with it. I'm just I'm doing a no at the for the last year because of my spine problems. I'm unable to keep all the tanks going that I want. So my tanks are crowded, and I never ever recommend anybody to do it. But because then I've learned in all these years what I can do and what I can't do.
Sure.
I know that as long as I keep on doing what I'm doing now, then I shouldn't have any problems. But I'm overloading the barb tank. The I don't know, the ab tank's probably okay. There's 5 in a 90, and it's got a homemade skimmer on there that has a foot square box on the top that can fill up and put foam all over the ceiling. So heavy skimming is the day on that one.
Heavy skimming works, and that's that's a big, huge key in my opinion. Is if there are things that's part of the reason I have such a hard time getting up here sometimes is because I don't have the experience that you and Dan and Lucie have, but with my experience, I know how to tell people to do this, but a lot of times I run into the fact that sometimes I don't follow the rules because I know how to deal with it, and so I completely get it. I hear what you're saying, but
My problem too, though, is that when I am posting something, it's strictly based on my own personal experiences,
yep.
plus what I have read from sources that I trust.
Hmm.
I've read a lot of stuff that I would never ever back because I don't trust the sources. So when I post, it's for the things that I believe in that maybe I haven't experienced, but I have faith in the source plus the experiences I have. Now, other people have much different experiences than what I've gone through,
Mhm.
and so they have different opinions. And I think everybody needs to post a different opinion so that um, there is a variety of the experiences out there. Someone new in the system might get a bit confused, but still, it's best if they pick the advice from one experienced person and start with that until they get their own experience and then get to know where they might be able to push things a little bit or try something that somebody else recommends. Um, but I find people send me emails and they're saying, well, they read that this happened or this is the best way to do it. And then I say, this is the best way. Only I don't like to say it's the best way. When I say something, it's what works for me. That doesn't make it the best way.
You're right. You're right. And I need to take that into consideration myself because you're absolutely right. It's better to say, in my opinion, and this is what's worked for me. But a lot of times I've found myself lately, if someone has a situation or a specific question, unfortunately, sorry, Dan, but I'll send them to Dan, and say he can help you a lot better with his vast experience with what he's.
Well, I'm very quick to tell people that there's other ways of doing things and that there's ways to go around things and that nothing's impossible. I'm also very quick to tell people when they tell me something that I want to do this, this, and this, and I will say, well, do you want to kill the seahorses? And sometimes that shakes people up, but that's how you get their attention sometimes. Um, there are some things that can be varied, and there are some things that, quite plain and simple, aren't going to work.
Mhm.
And some of those things are almost instantaneous, but some of those things take time to play out.
And there's a lot of situations like that. The discussion there just recently on about clownfish and a seahorse tank. I've seen so many people with disastrous results where the clownfish eventually got large enough and territorial enough that they, at the very least, were pestering the seahorses. But at the worst, they were actually biting on them.
Well, the tank mate thing is very intriguing to me because you look at the number of pictures and videos you see of clownfish with seahorses at work,
Yeah.
and look at how many where it has not worked.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with cleaner shrimp. My bookkeeper, I gave her a pair of reed eye as a gift, and she set up a tank at her apartment, and I gave her the reed eye. Everything was going fine for several months. One day she came into work and she said, "My seahorses died," and I tried to ascertain what happened. I really didn't get a good history as to anything that would really be anything wrong, so I gave her another pair, and she came in again about a month later, and they died again. And this time I said, let me come over and take a look at the tank. And when I went over and looked, I saw a cleaner shrimp. And I asked her, I said, when did you get the cleaner shrimp? Oh, the live fish store told me it would clean the seahorses. I got him just before the other pair died. The first pair died. So I said, let's take out the cleaner shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
We got rid of the Once we got rid of the cleaner shrimp, she kept the seahorses. I don't know how long it was, but it was for a long period of time. And yet other people will describe the cleaner shrimp cleaning their seahorses, and the seahorses love it. So
Well,
it's one of those.
Sorry.
It's one of those things where, in some cases, it works beautifully. In some cases, it is a complete disaster. And how do you define that when you're talking to people as to what's what? And one of the key things about this hobby is, and it's difficult for people that want everything to work. And this is why when I tell people how to set up a tank, I tell them what works long term with the least amount of maintenance the easiest. But there are other things that can be done if the person is observant and recognizes what's going on.
I agree completely, and it completely depends on, the person that's doing it and what they want to do and where they're at and their experience and knowledge. I just feel badly because it's become such a fast answer, Facebook related kind of thing, and so there are so many people that come in and show their tanks with all this stuff, and of course, everybody says, well, I can do that because they did that. And then when they disappear, nobody seems to notice. And it's just frustrating.
Well, that's why it's so easy, much easier when you're dealing with new people that have never had a tank before, and they come in and they say, I want to set up a seahorse tank. I have no experience. I've never had a tank. They're going to listen to everything I tell them, and I'm going to tell them to go with zeros as far as tank mates. Whether you're looking at seahorse.org or Fuse Jaw,
Mm-hmm.
and tell them what to do that is the safest, and generally they're going to follow that advice. The reefers that have more experience will go, well, I've had this before, and I think I could do this, and they, if they're not real attentive, they find out real quick that that doesn't work.
That was the problem I had. So many years of reefing before I got into it, and I thought, oh, I'll be able to do this. But it took me a few years to get through my head that I didn't know enough, and start doing more investigation. Now, mind you, a lot of the stuff that I was reading back when I started turns out to be not very good information by today's standards, but still, by doing more searching on the internet, I did learn a little bit more to the point where I started becoming successful. And right now, the biggest thing I'd like to get across to people now that seahorses are like people, and they aren't all going to have the same resistance to pathogens. Uh, when you look around in the human race, there's all sorts of people that never ever seem to get sick. There's others that seem to never be anything but sick, and then all the ones in between. So if you get 4 seahorses or 6 seahorses or whatever, you might have one that's very susceptible to things and going to come down with an infection quite readily, and the others may be much more resistant to it. And so you figure it's something that only that seahorse has got. Well, all the seahorses have probably been affected by the same bug, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that their system is able to handle it better. And
Asystematic carrier, right? Is an asymptomatic carrier. Is that how you say it?
well, I
That's
don't.
correct.
Okay. I'm
I
trying to
mean,
learn. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, there's people that walk around with that are carriers of certain diseases that are not sick, and the same thing can happen with fish, where the immune system of the individual keeps it from them getting sick, but they can pass on whatever it is to something else, and that something else may not have the immune capacity to overcome it.
And sorry, Ray. There are a lot of fears. There are a lot of things that can go wrong with seahorses, with reef tanks, with anything that we're doing, that we don't have every single bit of knowledge for. But, you can't live scared. You have to do the best you can, follow the knowledge of the people that I have on this channel. That's how you do it. Listen to people on this channel. No, I'm just kidding. But follow the advice of the people with experience, and make sure the people that you're listening to have experience, and be prepared for the consequences and the problems that you might face, and be ready to deal with them. And that's it. You can't live afraid, but be smart is kind of the thing. And I think that Tina asked something about tank mates, and Christopher Carey asked an interesting question. Christopher, I hope you're ready. We're doing the Australian live stream soon. But anyways, as soon as I can figure out how to get Sam in here. But Can mosquitoes breed in salt water? Anybody know?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
How do you know
Yeah.
that?
Well, because the mosquito abatement program down here, they have areas where salt water doesn't flow very well,
Okay.
and they have big pumps where they pump the water in and out to keep the water from being stagnant, so the mosquitoes don't breed.
Wow. There you go,
I
Christopher.
got them breeding right in the backyard here with the, when it gets rain and the puddles gather. Just drive me up a wall. I go out there, cut the grass again today, and just get eaten alive by the mosquitoes.
You still cut your own grass?
Yeah, but it takes me now 2 hours to cut the grass when it used to take me 45 minutes.
This
It
makes me want. This makes me want to
takes
come
me
cut
2
your
hours to
grass.
start the lawnmower.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I don't have that problem being a mechanic. I can usually find the problems for that.
And see, this is
What?
funny because my lawnmower is broken, so I could use you guys. But go ahead. Go
I'm
ahead.
not about to take a trip to find out. Traveling is a problem for me.
I know. I was just kidding. But
If I could travel, I'd be looking forward. I got a granddaughter going to University of Maine on a 4-year hockey scholarship, and it's about a 18 to 20 hour drive from here, and there's no way I can make it.
yeah. Well, I was kidding. I would never ask you to do that. Um, Just, guys, just to let you know, the boyfriend is in the background giving me the face and the looks and the, hey, I need to eat. You didn't cook dinner and you're not doing it and get on it. So we're going to probably have to cut this short. However, now we can do this more often. And
What time is it where you are?
it is 11:10 p.m.
And you haven't eaten?
I know I'm a terrible girlfriend. I'm terrible. But Lucie made a comment earlier about the French eating late. We always eat extremely late because I don't sleep. But that's another story. Anyhow, I was just seeing, I don't see any other questions, but I kind of lost track of Facebook. We will get better at this, and I will have most of the people you see here back on to discuss live feeds at a different point and have more seahorse discussions. And, Christopher Carey and Sam will be on to do an Australian live stream, talk about Australia seahorses and the methods there. We'll also have Colby on soon to talk about sea dragons, which we don't advise in home aquariums, but we can learn about them and see how cool and pretty they are. And we'll have lots of more guests, and we'll have some that are just, free-for-alls where we just chit-chat about whatever we want. Did anybody else have anything else they wanted to say, questions? I'm not trying to cut anybody short. I was just
wondering, is there a post that I'm supposed to be able to see on the screen here?
Well, are you
I clicked that Google link that you sent me.
okay, I'm going to send you my YouTube link, which if you actually subscribe, I'll show you, but if you subscribe to my channel and click the bell, then
I'd
it will...
rather not subscribe to something if I can get away with it.
Well, the other way is catch it, and you know what? Actually, it's 8 p.m. every Wednesday, Eastern. So I don't know what that is your time. I'll have to look at it. But on 8 p.m. every Wednesday, I do this.
Probably the same as you. Like right now, I'm about 12 minutes after 11.
Okay, then at 8 p.m. every Wednesday, look for me. If you don't want to subscribe, just search my YouTube channel or search on Facebook, and you'll find it. Click it, and I'll give you the link or email it to you. That's how you do it. That's easy enough. Dan, Lucie, again, thank you so much for coming on. Was there anything else? Tina, did you have any other questions? Anybody? Nada. Okay, we went a long time tonight, so thank you guys so much, and I've enjoyed the heck out of it, and we'll continue to do this and get better and better and have more people in here, because I know there were people that wanted to join and couldn't, so I'll keep working on it. We'll get better, and I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. Dan and Lucie, I'll say, and Tina, whoever's in the hangout, I'll say bye to you after we end it. But to everybody watching, thank you. You can ask more questions in the comments. I'm sure that the people in the stream will answer when they have time. And hope your Wine Wednesday was fabulous. I hope the wine was good and your seahorse love is better. I got to come up with a better tagline. By the way, I have shirts and mugs coming. We'll talk about that next time. All right, so now let me find the button before I do my cheers. Hey guys, happy Wine Wednesday. Hope your Dwarf Seahorses are awesome. Cheers.